Now that, hello.
That light's been off since last week. It drove me nuts yesterday.
Oh, but
So
it's working though, is it?
The light doesn't
work. The light
work.
doesn't go on when the microphone's working.
You have to call to see if you're on. It'll be, trust, it drove me nuts yesterday. Absolutely. You just gotta be careful.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It wasn't working all day yesterday, Gary said.
It was, absolutely.
Yeah,
He's on. Oh, he says he's.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If I could ask everybody to come to order. I think this side of the room. Miss Cook. Miss Cook. Tracy Cook. I'm just asking people to come to order, and you were... Stop bothering that woman. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please, if we could come to order. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask, I just don't think the sound system, I can tell from my own ears, is not working properly. No. Well, I will, but... Now, first, if I could ask our hardworking technicians, I don't think the sound system is working the way it's supposed to, and this light up here, I guess the budget chief went through a whole meeting where it doesn't work and you can't tell when it's on or off. And given my habit of making intemperate comments when the microphone's supposedly off, I don't have any such habit, but we should just try and get it working if we can. We have quorum, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll call the 30th meeting of the Executive Committee to order, and I will welcome all members of the committee and members of council and our staff, of course, but also the members of the public who are here today and the media. We acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and home to many diverse Indigenous peoples. And I'll remind people they can watch us on YouTube at Toronto City Council Live or follow the meeting on a computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? And if you have one, please indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. All right, I see none. May I please have a motion, Mayor? I'm sorry. Councillor Pasternak.
Yeah, just out of an abundance of caution on EX 30.8, I guess bullet point 1, there's a reference to Toronto Public Library, building capacity at the Old City Hall. In an abundance of caution, I'd like to declare an interest because my spouse, although on medical leave, is technically still an employee of Toronto Public Library. I'd like to participate in that debate, so if we could pull out that reference when we vote, that'd be appreciated.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, can I have a motion, please, to confirm the minutes of the Executive Committee meeting of November the 28th, 2017? Moved by Councillor Giorgio, second Councillor Pasternak. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 3, just to draw your attention to this on today's agenda, EX 30.3, Developmental Charges Bylaw Review, as you know, requires a statutory public meeting under the Developmental Charges Act, so this will be timed for 10 o'clock this morning or as soon thereafter as we can get to it. So we'll go through the agenda, and it may well be we're just shy of 10 o'clock, and we'll see what happens with that. But we do have to deal with that at a time which I propose be 10 o'clock this morning, and that also requires under the law a brief presentation to be made before consideration of that item, which also I think has some deputations on it. I want to proceed with the rundown of the agenda now, and if you want to hold an item, please state your name and say hold, and of course with items that have deputants, I will hold these items in my name. So starting with item 30.1, Waterfront Transit Network Plan, it's being held for deputations. Item 30.2, Implementing Tenants First, is being held for deputations. Item 30.3, EX 30.3, Developmental Charges Bylaw Review, has been mentioned earlier. It's being held for a presentation for deputations, and it's timed for 10 o'clock. Item EX 30.4, Implementation of Municipal Accommodation Tax, Hotel and Short-Term Rental Tax, is being held for deputations. Item 30.5, EX 30.5, Tax Policy Tools to Support Businesses, is being held for deputations. Item EX 30.6, review of the IMIT program is being held for deputations. Item 30.7, the financial impacts resulting from high lake water levels in waterfront parklands is being held for deputations. Item 30.8, the EX 30.8, Old City Hall, future uses and tenant options is being held for deputations. Item 30, EX 30.9, Sidewalk Toronto is being held for deputations. Item EX 30.10, Toronto Hydro Corporation review of executive compensation policy.
I would like to hold that, Councillor.
Is being held by Councillor Shiner. Item 30.11, site selection for a new consolidated police station, 54-55 division. All right. May I have a motion to approve the recommendation? Well, you're not a member of the committee, Councillor Fletcher.
You know that. Well, I can hold it for you. It's in my ward. It's a good news story, but I can hold it.
Okay. It's being held by Councillor McMahon. Item 30, EX 30.12, Toronto's Open Data Master Plan being held for deputations. Item 30. EX 30.13, use agreement for the Bentway. May I have a motion? There's no deputations here. May I have a motion to approve the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Ainsley, Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.14, authority to enter into bid agreements for the 2026 FIFA World Cup.
And move that.
Moved by Councillor Thompson. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item 30, EX 30.15, City of Toronto interest regarding airport ownership. May I have a motion to adopt the recommendations contained in the report? Councillor McMahon, Councillor Crawford, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.16, updated use of city resources during an election period policy. A motion to approve the recommendations of the city clerk. Councillor McMahon, Councillor DeGiorgio, all those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.17, review of code of conduct for members of local boards is being held for deputations. Item EX 30.18, adjustments to 2 affordable housing loans to the YWCA of Greater Toronto.
Hold, please.
Pardon me?
I'd like to hold that.
Held by Councillor Thompson. Item 30.19, EX 30.19, affordable rental housing and ownership opportunities in Thistletown, Panorama Court. May I have a motion to adopt the recommendations in the report? Moved by Councillor Bylaw, Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.20, St. Hilda's Tower Seniors Housing. A motion to approve the recommendations of the report moved by Councillor Bylaw, Deputy Mayor Bylaw, Councillor Crawford. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.21, Phase 2 affordable rental homes at the Mirvish Village redevelopment. A motion to approve the staff recommendations from Deputy Mayor Bylaw, Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.22, modernization of 389 Church Street. Motion to approve the staff recommendations. Deputy Mayor, you want to hold it?
No, I very briefly, because there's been a few reports on housing, I just want to thank staff for all the work, and in particular this one, because it shows how people have been collaborating. This at 389 Church has been a partnership between the province with the Homes to Good programs, the City of Toronto, and TCHC. This is a TCHC old rooming house that will be converted into 120 units. So I think this is the result of when governments come together, and using our assets, we can really turn these projects around, and we just need to do a lot more of these, and this is a perfect example of what we're doing with the properties that we have.
Thank you. And I'll say the announcement yesterday of embedding medical staff in the shelters is another example of that kind of collaboration. We've had the staff recommendations moved. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Item number EX 30.23, TTC capital budget in year technical adjustments. We've had a recommendation come forward from the Transit Board to be forwarded to City Council. Is that moved by Councillor Crawford? All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. EX 30.24, 2016 Toronto Transit Commission Diversity and Human Rights Achievements. The staff recommendation here is to adopt the recommendations from the TTC Board. May I have a motion to so do? Councillor McMahon. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. EX 30.25, request to amend eligibility requirements for school board child care capital funding. The motion here is to adopt the suggested disposition to adopt the recommendations from the City School Board's Advisory Committee. May I have a motion to so do? Councillor Crawford, Councillor DeGiorgio, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item 30, EX 30.26, request to amend site plan approval protocols for schools. Suggested disposition is to adopt the recommendations from the City School Board's Advisory Committee. Someone moving? You want to hold that? Hold it. Councillor Shiner?
Yes.
Hold it. Okay, thank you. EX 30.27, a dynamic symbol of success, inclusion on city-owned properties in Ontario Building Code and Highway Traffic Act, and this is coming to us from the Accessibility Advisory Committee. It's being held for deputations. EX 30.28, employment accessibility at the City of Toronto, and this is, again, adopting a recommendation from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee. May I have a...
Be happy to move that.
Moved by Councillor Shiner. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.29, request for staff presentation at the Accessibility Advisory Committee on Bloor Street bike lanes. Motion to adopt the recommendation from the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee.
More than happy to move that.
Moved by Councillor Shiner, Councillor Pasternak. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.30, request for staff presentation at the Accessibility Advisory Committee on accessibility at construction sites on public spaces.
And
motion to.
I would be very happy to move.
Councillor Shiner again, Councillor Pasternak. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Request for staff presentation EX 30.31 at the Accessibility Advisory Committee on accessibility features of the City of Toronto website. A motion. Well, Councillor Pasternak, just to shake it up a little, Councillor, but thank you.
No problem.
Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Shiner, all those in favor? Staff recommendations or the committee recommendations opposed? Carried. Item EX 30.32, exploring a carbon price policy for City of Toronto projects. And it says here we can't receive it. It is recommending, as you can see, and it's up to us, there's no recommendation that comes with this, that the Parks and Environment Committee report on the viability of a carbon pricing policy and, if appropriate, a proposed policy and implementation plan.
So I would move that. No. It's a good thing. I'll hold it so we can come back.
All right, well, held by Councillor Shiner. And then finally on the agenda, as we have it here, EX 30.33, a cost of preventing information being released at Toronto Hydro. That is being held for deputations. So I guess do I now have to have a motion to approve the agenda on the basis of the items have been dealt with? We've dealt with item by item, so we don't have to do that. That's only at City Council. And then I have my... I'm sorry, what am I'm not seeing anything on my screen, so I can't. There's apparently a new business item that I... All right. Who's wanting to add the new business? Deputy Mayor Bylaw, did you want to add an item of new business? Do you want to just indicate what it is? And
It's with regards to the new program for the province on the development charges, the exemption to 150% AMR rental buildings. So we will be executing the program, and we need to seek authorization to have the Office of the Affordable Housing Office working on that program.
all right, may I have a motion? Well, it's moved by Councillor Bylaw to seconded Councillor DeGiorgio. All those in favor of adding this item of new business on the provincial housing and development charges related to that, all in favor? Opposed? Carried. Ladies and gentlemen, one more thing just before we proceed into the business at hand. Looking at the speakers list, we have well in excess of 50 deputations today and a considerable interest, which is a good thing, in a number of items. And in order to ensure an efficient meeting, I would like to propose the following for your consideration: to move that we close the speakers list at 10:30 this morning. Secondly, that for all items we reduce speaking and questioning times for members of the public and for ourselves to 3 minutes. So I would so move. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Now we have about 10 minutes, so I guess we can get a start because we have the timed item for the development charges bylaw. I guess we can get a start on the deputations for, I just don't know if there's an item. I guess we may as well start at the beginning. We have only 3 on Waterfront Transit, so we may be able to get that done. We have first Jody Spiegel. I hope that's the correct pronunciation. Senior Vice President, Development, First Capital Realty. Jody Spiegel. Is that person here with us today? Jody Spiegel? Okay, we'll go on and see if somebody... Hamish Wilson. Mr. Wilson, are you here? I haven't seen you, but there you are. Okay. So consistent with the the committee's decision, you have 3 minutes, and we welcome you as always.
I must admit it's a bit disappointing to have 3 minutes, given that we've had a century of plans for robust transit to the center of the core, and quite honestly, this item is inferior. It doesn't provide that robust transit solution that has been desperately needed and is still desperately needed, so I would urge you all to push this back, send it back for more study of analysis and analysis, and get it back into after the election in the last quarter of Q18. It's disappointing because if you have an interest in the better transit in this area, the West Waterfront LRT-EA of 1993, which had this map of the downtown relief line in the West End, that's the sort of thing we should be doing, something robust, something heavy. This good analysis said there were 2 types of demand. And this milk run that is being proposed, it's ignoring that need, that desperate need for something that's fast and heavy from this pinch point at the base of High Park into the center of the city. And they even made a point in this 1993 analysis of actually timing it out, and a direct run in along Front Street was clearly superior than this milk run, which has now emerged again as being the solution, which is far less of the solution than it really should be. We need the faster routes in, and as time scuds, what I've been trying to suggest to people is a new idea aligned with that original outline, but make it reversible. So at least you're doing something, and make it fast to come in one way on a one-lane thing because land is tight, and then send it back out on King and Queen, whatever it is, probably should be LRT. And I'm not talking about subways right now because we have to do something fast and quick, although the core is the place for subways, not so much the suburban sprawl area. But that's one solution. Yes, it costs money, but why don't we think about spending money where it's needed? Another solution is to extend the King Street right-of-way proposal, but tweak it again so that you only do one side of King, but you do another way on Queen Street. So you get a loop, and you don't stress the either King or Queen quite as much as what the King Street right-of-way pilot now is doing, which is giving you some feedback. The other way is to do it the other way. So you have King and Queen going in the opposite directions. Another solution, which again has been ignored, is to use the north side of the Western Corridor into Front Street, and then again do a loop. We're just not thinking about doing things properly, I don't think, and there's a real need for improving our transit and our transport because we could get 6 places of relief on King, on Queen, on Bloor as well, on the Gardiner, on the Lakeshore. Go desperately needs a relief as well. Another thing is that if we do this, we can actually let the GO buses get onto this right-of-way too. It's inferior, put it off.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. Are there any questions of the deputant? I would point out a large part of what's going on in this stage-gated process is to do more work on these things as we go along, and so there is going to be more work done as you suggest. But thank you very much for coming today. Stacia Bogdan, Director of Planning and Redevelopment, St. Joseph's Health Centre.
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order. It's
Yes.
very hard to hear the deputants right now, so I'm just wondering if you can have people.
Yeah. The point has been made. I noticed myself when Mr. Wilson was presenting. There's, in addition to some of the addition to the noise from outside, there's quite a bit of noise in here. Just the general murmur of conversation. I think particularly to my left, my geographic left. So if you could please just be courteous to everybody here, including the deputants, that would be great. Ms. Bogdan, thank you for coming. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good morning. I am the Director of Planning and Redevelopment at St. Joseph's Health Centre, and thank you for the opportunity to address the Executive Committee today. Today, St. Joseph's Health Centre asks that in respect to this planning initiative, that future planning of the Waterfront Transit Network Plan consider the needs and efforts of our important community institution. By way of background, St. Joseph's is located at 30 the Queensway, which is within the Section 2 of the planning study area. We have the busiest emergency department in the city, providing 24-hour-a-day emergency services that last year accommodated more than 100,000 visits. We serve a very large population with a concentration living in the various neighborhoods along the Toronto Western Waterfront. We have 365 patient rooms, and we are projected to grow to 540. We provide a wide range of ambulatory care and mental health services and are seen as a community destination for healthcare services in the Western Toronto, Central Toronto LHIN. The hospital is also a major employment destination, providing approximately 3,000 jobs as well as educational programming for prospective healthcare professionals. Over the past several years, we've engaged our community, staff, clinical leaders, and consultants to plan for the renewal and expansion of our services to accommodate our forecasted and evidence-based growth in our catchment area. So providing improved access and mobility via transit for our patients and our staff is a priority. We need to be able to rely on safe and convenient transit access in order to embed the successful operations for our hospital. We do have concerns about the preferred alignment chosen for this area, given that it would be located in the order of 150 meters south of the hospital, would be physically separated by the Lakeshore Boulevard, Gardner Expressway, the GO Transit Line, and the Queensway. And to be considered, there is also a significant grade difference. As part of providing direct and convenient connections between planned new transit infrastructure and the health center, we request that consideration be given to providing transit stop locations and/or transfer opportunities that are appropriate for our patients that often have limited mobility. Given the items presented in our deputation, St. Joseph's fully and respectfully requests your support of the following as planning continues. That as part of a transit project assessment process, future background studies will be prepared in support of connecting the identified transit stop locations to St. Joseph's Health Centre. That financial implications include consideration of improved pedestrian connections. For example, there's been reference to a pedestrian bridge, which provides potentially an opportunity for weather-protected and seamless integration between the proposed route and St. Joseph's Health Centre. And also that the 501 streetcar be maintained and improved as a frequent service with adequate and improved capacity within its existing route to provide safe and convenient transit accessibility to the front door of St. Joseph.
I'll have to ask you to conclude if you can, and then there is going to be some questioning of you, so that might help you to get out some other points if you have some left.
Sure. We embrace the introduction of high-quality transit service and look forward to working with the city in further planning.
Thank you very much. Councillor Perks had a question of you. Councillor?
Hi. So if I understood you correctly, you're acknowledging that right now the 501, the Queensway streetcar, stops at your front door and you want to maintain that as your principal transit service.
We'd like to ensure that the proposed connections of the LRT connect with the 501, so we would like to, yes, maintain that the 501 continue to provide that stop, but it's also supported with the LRT transfer connections.
Okay, so the plan as imagined now has the 501
Yes.
and the Waterfront West connect.
Yes.
Just a couple hundred meters to the west of you at Colburn Lodge.
Right.
And so that's the connection you're looking for?
We would like to maintain the transit stop as close as possible to the front door of the hospital. One of the limiting factors for us for our entire population that comes to the hospital, both staff and patients, are the challenges of getting to the front door of the hospital. So even a few hundred meters to the west is a challenge. So
But
I think
you'll still have the stop of the 501
Yes.
at Sunnyside, I imagine,
Yes.
is the one that's, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Perks. Anybody else with questions of the deputy?
Sorry.
Well, I'm sorry. Councillor Shanner, yeah.
So, sorry. It's Stasia?
Asia.
Asia?
Yes.
Have you been working with city staff at all in the past in regards to the requests that you have?
We have been, had a few meetings with city staff, and we did register that the importance of as direct access possible. We do understand that there are some technical limitations of the two-way proposal, and so in that respect, we'd like to continue to work with city staff to align and maximize the connectivity.
So what would you like from us today besides putting your perspective, your position forward publicly?
I would like for St. Joseph's to be involved as a fully engaged, important stakeholder, as well as the potential to involve our Patient Community Engagement Council to reflect their objectives as well. Okay. So we would like to be considered as we go forward and work with the city to improve connectivity.
You must have sent us a letter?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions of the deputy? Thank you very much, Ms. Bogdan. I think that you've registered a message with us today, and I know from having been to St. Joseph's myself how much of a role it plays, especially for some of our most vulnerable people in the community, and I think it's important they be connected easily there. So a message received, and we'll look forward to working with you going forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just to ask once again, because we started off and we have this item to do at 10 o'clock, Jody Spiegel, Senior Vice President, Development, First Capital Realty. Okay, well, what we have done then is completed the deputations on this item 1, and I think it now looks like it's 10 o'clock on the dot, and that would take us then to item EX 30.3.
Mayor Tory?
Yes, Councillor.
I don't know if there's many speakers on it. Maybe we can just finish this item?
Okay, can I just get an indication of how many people wanted to ask questions of staff on this, and that would give us a bit of and speak? One. Okay, well, there's enough that I think we'd be better off because we said 10 o'clock. Well, it said as soon as possible. Let's finish it then. You're right. Let's do that. So the next thing would then be questions of staff from members of council not on the committee. Did Councillor Perks know?
I may want to speak, but
okay, fine. Did I see a hand over there? I can't see back there. Oh, it's Councillor. Okay, Councillor Troisi. Questions of staff.
Great. What is the planned residential population and employment population of the East Bayfront and Lower Yonge precincts?
We haven't identified the specific locations as part of our work here. We can pull that out later. The population in the study area throughout is, we're looking at an 83% increase in population and a 38% increase in employment.
Entirely. Oh, yes, and the good news is they're going to fix that on Friday.
Great. What projects have been completed and are currently under construction in these precincts?
There are a number of projects in various stages of either approvals or construction. The priorities right now are the extension, over to Dufferin. That's currently at a 30% design stage right now.
Just two more questions. The study to consider alternatives to the portal connection is intended to find a more cost-effective option that will provide good transit service. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And we've got options that look at both the portal option and no portal on Queens Quay as well, and they're included in the cost estimates.
And in the interim period, until we build out this transit, what methods will we use to serve the residents, workers, and students that have already moved in?
We've been working with the TTC and Waterfront Toronto as part of this project, and there are a number of improvements we can look at, including improved bus service in particular in the East Bayfront, and we'll be working with the TTC on that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Troisi. Are there other members of the council visiting with us today? Seeing none, I'd move to members of the committee with questions on the Waterfront Transit Report. Okay, seeing none, then, did you have a question, Councillor Pasternak?
Yes,
okay,
thank
please.
you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. Has this project ever been endorsed by City Council as a Phase 2 Metrolinx project?
Yes.
Through the chair, this was identified, the Waterfront Transit Reset was identified as a priority in PTIF2, in the PTIF2 funding.
But is this, is Metrolinx in on the conversation as a funding partner? Or are we on our own with this?
Through the chair, my understanding about the way that PTIF is structured is that there would be an expectation of provincial funding in any of the projects that are funded, that the province would also have to contribute a share, and we are negotiating some of those details still with the province. We have been involving Metrolinx in this project in terms of our technical advisory committee and keeping them apprised of all the work on this. but it's not a joint project like some of our other transit projects.
So they're listening, but they're not an active funding partner. If we move these recommendations today, will they be more to the table or less to the table?
Through the chair, I think that Metrolinx recognizes the importance of this project. They've certainly highlighted it in the draft of the Regional Transportation Plan and the updated transit network. I can't speak to how committed they will be or what will need to happen in the negotiations about their funding contribution.
Now, for the full build-out in today's dollars, what is staff's recommendation or estimate on the full build-out cost?
The complete full build-out is looking at an estimate of $1.9 to $2.3 billion.
And does that include the full connection with Union Station?
Yes, that project is included in that.
Okay, thank you.
I should just to help Councillor Pasternak, I had a meeting because I don't want any impression to linger out there that we're going to accept the notion of being on our own with the federal money. I met with the provincial finance minister as recently as yesterday to indicate this remains, all of these projects in phase 2 remain a high priority for provincial funding, and he received that message. So we're not on our own. We're hoping to have multiple partners in proceeding with this and the other priority projects approved by council. Other committee members wishing to ask questions of staff. Councillor Shiner.
I'm glad they're happy I'm asking questions. I appreciate that. Who am I asking it to? So the issue was raised about connectivity, in particular for those with disabilities, accessible access to St. Joseph's Health Centre. Is that something that you can continue to work on with them and see what type of connections you can give them?
Through the chair, certainly we could continue to work on that, and accessibility is a key factor that is part of the design work on all of our new transit projects.
And have you met with them in the past?
We have, as the speaker from the hospital indicated, we have met with St. Joseph's over the course of this project, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Shiner. Any other members of the committee wishing to ask questions of staff? All right, I guess then we could move to speakers. And Councillor Perks had earlier indicated he got himself first on the list because he'd indicated a wish to speak. And so over to you, sir.
Thank you. I've never spoken with a rhythm section before. Just very quick.
You normally don't need one. I say that respectfully.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to very quickly thank the staff who've been working on this. This is trying to threading the needle through here and all the technical problems and challenges. It's an astonishingly complex job. Just a little bit you heard about today with the St. Joseph's Hospital, the technical challenges of getting up from the waterfront to the Queensway and finding the right place to do it. That's been the subject of like a decade of engineering work to try to figure out how to do it. I understand Councillor Shiner wants to move a small motion to make sure that the hospital and accessibility continues to be part of the conversation. That's great. But let's get on with this project. This will be transformative. It's one of the ways that we provide relief to people trying to get into the downtown in the least expensive and most elegant way. So thanks to the staff on this. Let's continue the work, the very good work we've been doing with public consultation and engagement, and get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Perks. Other speakers who are here from not members of the committee who wish to speak? Okay. Members of the committee wishing to speak? Councillor Shiner.
Sorry, could you...
You know, what doesn't help is actually keeping the door open. We can either let them in or not let them in, but keeping the door open just makes it more difficult for us to carry on.
The door should be closed.
All right. Just hold on for 1 minute and see if there's some resolution to this, and then we'll. All right. Councillor Shiner will ask you to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. I have a motion.
Just we need 1 minute on that, but you've indicated you have one, so.
Motion is generally just to continue the consultation with the hospital on their request, and in particular, and being able to make it an accessible, the accessibility in an accessible location.
There it is. All right. Do you have any further remarks in furtherance of the motion, or?
I don't know. I got to read it.
Oh, okay.
So my colleague beside me has asked me to add to it where it says continue to consult with St. Joseph Hospital and other stakeholders. And in speaking to that, and thank you for that, we're often reminded here when folks from the Accessibility Committee do come to see us about the difficulty that they often face where many of us don't. Where a small step or a long walkway or an icy sidewalk could be something that we can find a way around and they can't. So I appreciate the hospital coming here, trying to make sure that they find a good connection to this main transit line that's being improved along that area. I have North York General Hospital along the Shepherd subway line, and people are able to gain access to that, although they have major streets to cross, and the accessibility issue wasn't as well thought of when that was put in place. So I'll move that along with the rest of the staff recommendations and hope to see this project move forward.
Thanks, Councillor Shiner. Other members of the committee wishing to speak? Well, I will just say a word then, and we can call the question on this. You know, for a number of reasons, and I agree with Councillor Perks and what he said about this being a transformative project, and I agree with his sentiments that he expressed with respect to just continuing to move this forward, and that's what this report proposes. And I will be looking for every opportunity that I can, working with our officials and with the Metrolinx, TTC, and whoever else ends up being involved, to do just that. And I did mention that I was yesterday, and it's the latest of what won't be the end of a series of meetings to try to get this project included as soon as possible in the provincial funding to match the federal funding. And I say that because I indicated when I went down to what I think is going to be a first-class development, I think it's called Sugar Wharf, that Menkes, for example, is putting together on the waterfront. And I went down to the groundbreaking and made the point there that, you know, we must not fall into the trap that we fell into over a period of many years as a city of allowing great developments like this to be built. Quality development, that one is, in both in terms of its job creation opportunities for people to work there, but also people to live there, public spaces, and so on, but without the transit. And this is an opportunity. There's already a large amount of development there, as has been mentioned by some of the deputants, to keep moving forward with this. And it's one of the most complicated reports that I've read on transit because there are so many parts to it. But we can't let that slow us down. You know, I stood similarly with Councillor Grimes out in the west end of this, and of course there is an example of where there's been a ton of development, some of it admittedly approved by the OMB and not by at the behest of this council, but nonetheless there's thousands of people living there with inadequate transit. And so this will help with that, as would of course the establishment of a park lawn transportation terminal there to supplement the Mimico GO station. So I just hope that we as a council can keep moving this forward, and this is one additional small step today to have it move through the Executive Committee and on to City Council, where I hope it will receive overwhelming support to just keep it moving forward. And I will be looking for every opportunity, I hope on your behalf, to keep it moving faster if we possibly can, to get the provincial funding, which I'm working on virtually a daily basis, so that this can actually happen as soon as possible. So those are my comments, and unless there are any other speakers, I'm ready to call first the question on Councillor Shiner's motion, which we'll put up. There it is, motion number 1 from Councillor Shiner. I'll ask the question. I'll call the question on the motion. All those in favour, opposed, carried. And the item, as amended, all those in favour, opposed, carried. All right, that's excellent that we got through that. Good suggestion, Councillor Shiner. And now it will be time, given that it's as soon thereafter as possible, for us to turn to item 30, EX 30.3, the development charges bylaw review. And by statute, we have to have a presentation on that, which we will now receive. Joe, if everybody could just introduce themselves for purposes of the record, that would be great, and then we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, members of the Executive Committee. I'm Joel Farag, the Acting Chief Financial Officer for the City of Toronto. Joining me today, to my right is Rob Hatton. Rob is the Executive Director of Corporate Finance, and to my left is Shirley Sue. Shirley has been the Project Director on the DC Bylaw Review. In terms of agenda, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to briefly walk you through some background information, including a description of the DC bylaw process that we've undertaken to date. We're going to discuss how we arrived at the DC rates. These are the development charge rates that have been calculated pursuant to the Development Charges Act. We're going to talk at some length about potential DC policies for Council's consideration, as well as how we have engaged key stakeholders as well as members of the public to date. Mr. Mayor, I'm going to start off by showing a slide that I often show when I meet with debt rating agencies. This slide shows how we rank in North America in terms of high-rise construction, buildings construction. We currently have 156 such buildings, number one, only second, and higher even than the city of New York. More than Miami, LA, Chicago, Houston, San Francisco, Dallas, Atlanta, and Boston combined. This is truly a remarkable statistic. Toronto, in fact, has ranked number one in all of but 6 previous years. Showing you this slide, which illustrates again in 2012 Toronto's ranking. We had 178 high-rise construction happening in the city, vastly exceeding our North American, any other city in North America. Needless to say, this extraordinary growth places huge demands on municipal infrastructure, and the city has made significant capital investment in both hard and soft services to accommodate that growth. We have at our disposal 4 key funding tools. We use Section 37 of the Planning Act to allow us to secure community benefits in exchange for height and density. We also make use of Section 42. This is the parkland dedication requirement, and we fund our parkland acquisition as well as Parks and Rec precipitated by growth through that funding tool. But by and large, we use development charges, which have raised roughly $225 million annually in the past 3 years to fund growth. Needless to say, if we can't fund the cost of growth through these 3 sources, we utilize property taxes and user fees to fund the balance. So what are DCs? These are one-time charges that are collected from landowners, land developers at the time of building permit issuance. The principle here is that growth should pay for itself so that the cost of providing growth-related infrastructure doesn't fall on existing ratepayers in the form of higher taxes and user fees. DCs are governed by provincial statute. That's the Development Charges Act. And that act was put in place back in 1990, and the city has continued to use that regime of charges since amalgamation. The city's last major DC bylaw was completed in 2013. DC bylaws by statute have a maximum life of 5 years. And so we have to, if we want to continue to collect development charges, we have to update the bylaw prior to October of 2018. The DC Act requires that the City Council undertake three things. First of all, we have to prepare a DC background study. This documents the growth forecast of the city, the methodology by which we arrive at the DC charge, and we've had the good fortune of retaining Hempson Consulting. Hempson's been an expert on DC background studies and the subject of DCs for the past couple of decades. They've acted on our behalf. They've completed the study, and it has been tabled with the clerk on January the 9th. In addition to that requirement, we have to hold a statutory public meeting, which is the purpose of today's meeting. And in order to pass the new charge, Council has to adopt a bylaw. We're targeting to do that in March or April of this year. The DC bylaw update is a really lengthy process. We started about a year ago, and the review was again led by Rob and Shirley and supported by Hempson. The study review process was highly consultative. We engaged all city programs across the organization. We had early engagement with key industry stakeholders, and we believe that we have a really good study that's supportable and defensible, and we're going to be continuing to engage key stakeholders in further refining the study and methodology and arriving at rates that are would be considered by Council over the course of the next couple of months. The following slide outlines the key steps that are required by the Development Charges Act. I won't go through this slide in great detail. Suffice it to say that the legislation is very prescriptive on how we undertake the analysis with respect to the assumptions and the review process. You can find all of the details in the background study. This is a study that's about 400 and some odd pages, and it has been tabled with the city clerk. The study includes a list of all of the capital projects and the calculations and the methodology that have been used in arriving at the charge. The study effectively culminates in an arrival of the maximum level of DCs that can theoretically be imposed in accordance with the legislation. And this next slide highlights for you what these charges could look like if Council adopts them. Needless to say, they are increasing at a significant rate, roughly doubling the charge. I've highlighted for you in blue the proposed or calculated charge on apartment units. They range in price from $17,000, which is the current charge on one-bedroom units, to $33,000. And on two-bedroom units, the current charge is $25,000, and the calculated rate is 104% higher at $51,000. I highlighted this because about 85 to 90% of our development comes in the form of high-rise apartments, condominiums, and the like. On the non-residential side, which is reflected at the bottom, we currently provide exemption to industrial land uses, and we're proposing that we continue to do that for economic development reasons. We also provide exemptions for office development, and that will continue to be the case under the bylaw. We are, however, recommending that we continue with the ground floor retail charge, and the calculated charges are reflected at the bottom of that chart. A number of factors have contributed to the increase in the levies. Growth requires increasing servicing capacity. We have a number of additional projects, particularly in the areas of transit and roads, and water and sewer infrastructure. We require that to accommodate the growth. Increased land and construction costs have also accounted for the increase. And the province, about a year or so ago, relaxed some of the constraints that were imposed on municipalities with respect to the calculation methodology, and we've been able to utilize that to increase the charge. This next slide illustrates for you, Mr. Mayor, the types of projects that are contained in the background study. for which we will utilize development charges to the fullest extent to fund. Again, transit is one of the key capital infrastructure requirements that is reflected in the background study. We're imposing charges for the TYSSE, the Scarborough Subway, Smart Track, and a whole host of other initiatives that are contained in our capital program. The DC study recovers costs for 18 different city services. Shelter is in fact a new DC service that was added in the study that wasn't included in the past. And this pie chart just illustrates for you that about 73% of the residential charge is related to transit, as well as transportation and engineered services. The balance is related primarily towards soft services, including Parks and Rec and libraries and fire facilities. With respect to the non-residential DC allocation, about 93% of the charge relates to transit and engineered services. And again, as I mentioned before, we are exempting industrial and office development from that levy.
What time is it happening?
I'm moving it.
This next chart illustrates for you, Mr. Mayor, how we compare to other GTA municipalities. The existing charge on a large apartment unit is roughly $27,000. If council adopts the calculated charge, it would be much higher than the GTA average, but comparable to those charges that are imposed in York Region as well as Peel. Again, this next chart provides a comparison of the calculated charge on industrial development, and it shows under the second bar the proposal, which is to exempt that land use. We are recommending, again, a ground floor retail levy, which is slightly above average, comparable to those that are imposed in York and Halton Region. And finally, what we wanted to show is a comparison of a typical 8-story commercial office building and how the charges would affect that type of development. And to the extent that we're exempting the office component of such a building, the charge would be relatively modest. We've taken that policy position because we firmly believe that we want to incentivize those types of employment uses. And from an economic development and fiscal policy perspective, that makes really good sense. No major changes are contemplated with respect to our current exemptions. We're proposing to continue to exempt affordable housing through the Open Door program. That was a program that was adopted by Council back in 2015, and it provides a whole host of exemptions and relief from the payment of development charges as well as other fees and property taxes. So there are no significant changes from an exemption perspective that is contained in the draft bylaw. In terms of other policies, we're continuing with a uniform citywide charge. This has been the case since amalgamation. That regime of charges really works well. The development community is familiar with it, and we've had significant consensus that that is really the way to go with respect to citywide charges as opposed to area-specific charges. We again want to listen to the deputants with respect to transition. The charge is going up significantly, and we think it's important that we have some form of transition mechanism. And we're really anxious to hear from the deputants today as to what they think is a reasonable transition provision. We continue to collect the development charge at above grade permits. The development community has asked that we consider amending that to the timing of the payment to first building permit stage. In terms of stakeholder engagement, this chart illustrates for you the number of meetings that we've had with the development community, as well as the ratepayer organizations and the general public. and we're going to continue to engage with those discussions and that dialogue over the course of the next 2 months before we come back with a final DC bylaw for this committee's consideration. The input that we've received to date from the industry is reflected in this next slide. They'd like to see additional time for technical review. There's been some suggestion that we implement the bylaw upon the expiry of the existing bylaw, which is in October, so we delay implementation till then. I spoke earlier about transition, and I think that's a key feature of any new bylaw. We have to have some form of transition to implement the substantial increases that are reflected under the calculated charges. There has been some expressions of concern with respect to housing affordability and what the increases might do with respect to that. The purpose-built rental providers have expressed an interest in looking at the charge and mitigating the impact, because they've suggested that that kind of an increase would have impact the viability of that type of development. Again, most industry stakeholders suggested that the citywide charges is the approach to take. There has been some concern expressed, and it's really has nothing to do with the development charge proposal, but concern expressed with respect to the development approval process and the length of time it takes to get approvals in place. With respect to input that's been received from the ratepayers and the general public, there's been really mixed input on phase-in. There are those that would like us to implement the increases immediately, and others have suggested a more gradual approach is probably a more reasonable way to proceed. There's been, again, mixed input on the level of the charges. Some have suggested that we ought to be lowering the charge to accommodate certain public objectives, and others have suggested that we, in fact, increase the charge beyond that level, which is reflected in the background study, in order to mitigate the impact of high growth areas. There has been some concern about housing affordability as well, and the impact that the additional charges would cause with respect to being able to afford accommodation and housing. Further, there's been expressions indicated that perhaps we should be focusing the DC collections and spending them in areas of growth. And I think we collectively agree that DCs should be used to accommodate areas of growth. In terms of next steps, Mr. Mayor, we are going to come forward with a final bylaw for this committee's consideration. We expect that we'll be engaging further consultations with stakeholders, and it's really important that we make sure that we get this right, that the bylaw is defensible, because after all, it is appealable to the OMB. And we just want to exercise a great deal of due diligence before we come back with the final bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe and the team. And I guess we now would, I think what I would propose to do is hold off on questions of the presenters and staff generally until we've heard from our deputants, and then all the questions can be as best informed as possible by the public input. So we'll thank you very much for your presentation, a very complete presentation, and move to hear from our deputants. And the first on that list today was Heather Tremaine, CEO Options for Homes. Thank you for being here, Ms. Tremaine. You have 3 minutes, and there may be some questions for you.
Okay, great. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. Options for Homes, as you may know, is an affordable homeownership delivery group. The simplest way to describe our model is that we take what would conventionally be the profit a developer receives, and we provide that to a purchaser as a down payment. We aim for that down payment to be about 15% of the value of the unit, so that purchasers can get a conventional mortgage. They're not paying CMHC mortgage insurance, which is usually 4% of the value of the unit. And that's essentially our model. And right now, we have 525 units under construction in the City of Toronto. We have another 1,100 units in our pipeline. And the projects that are in construction, the average income of purchasers in those units is $62,000 a year. That's family income. That's for all of our unit types. And we think of ourselves as part of an important part of the housing continuum. We see this incredible pressure in the rental sector. And for 525 families, the buildings that are under construction, those families are moving out of rental units and into ownership. And also establishing kind of more stability for their families. And they're part of a mixed income community. So we think that that's an important thing, and it's an important thing that should be supported. And unlike rental units, as you heard in the presentation, rental units have there's a waiver of DCs for rental units. There is no waiver of DCs for ownership. Currently, there is the HOPE program, which for 100 units a year gets some kind of deferral. So what we would like to suggest that there be some opportunity for a deferral of DCs for ownership units. We have 1,000 units in our portfolio that we've delivered that have received deferrals. Of those 1,000 units, the average return to the city for the deferral of those DCs is 12.5%. So if the city were willing to, in fact, invest in those units, invest in those purchasers, there is actually a significant return that's available to the city through the deferral of these DCs. And I think it's quite important to think about the timing of this. Right now, we've seen, well, I've been at Options for 3 years. The cost per square foot of our units have increased by $250 a square foot. That's because the market has increased that much. We also have stress tests now that have increased the kind of income thresholds by about $10,000 for a 2-bedroom unit. So our incomes have gone from $62,000 a year up to close to $82,000 a year of qualifying income for the units that we're just about to bring to market.
I'll have to ask you to conclude. There is going to be a question of you, so you'll have a chance to make some more points.
So our request is that council consider deferring the DCs for affordable ownership units, kind of the increase in the DCs to be deferred, and that would be paid back in the longer term by the homeowner when they sell the unit.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Main. Councillor DiCiano had a question for you, and so over to you, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in. So I'm just a little confused. When you build homes, do you buy land?
We do.
And you buy it at market?
Yeah.
Okay, because...
And we build, we have to pay market cost for construction.
Of course.
We're kind of a unique group in the sense that we act very much like a developer, but instead of taking the profit, we provide it to our purchasers as down payment support.
And do you pay the development charge once you develop the unit?
We do. Right now, we pay DCs unless we get exemptions or deferrals through the HOPE program, which we get for a limited number of units.
But right now, you're paying the development charge. So, and there's this fallacy out there, this argument that increasing development charges increases the price of homes. There couldn't be anything farther from the truth, which is why I'm concerned that you come today and give us that explanation. All that's going to happen when you increase development charges is you're going to lower the price of raw land. So you're actually going to be able to buy land at a cheaper price because it's the only variable cost in the development process. So I'm not sure why, when the city is growing and we need infrastructure to be built, why would we defer anything for the growth of the city when it's that growth that needs the money to be invested for the infrastructure?
I think there's a couple things. One is it will never come all off the cost of the land. That's never going to happen. What will happen is that we will start to provide a lower second mortgage, so there's even less support for purchasers. And I guess the question kind of goes back to you at some level. What kind of city do you want? Do you want to stop enabling middle-income earners to be able to purchase in the city? Is that the desire? I mean, I think there's a balancing act here. We're not saying, this isn't a deferral across the board. We're suggesting that for nonprofit developers who come in, and we put 15% of those value of those units on the table for purchasers. We're saying, can you come to the table also to help ensure affordability for what will ultimately be a limited number of units on an annual basis? So I guess the kind of question comes back to you as well.
But doesn't the city offer the open door program to folks like yourselves?
The city offers the open door program. There is a portion of the open door program, the HOPE dollars, that supports ownership. That's, I believe, 100 units a year that are supported through HOPE. Sorry, 200 units a year that are supported through HOPE. Of our units that are under construction right now, less than a third have received those funds. So we don't get that on every project, on every unit.
Okay, but you are paying market rates for land and construction.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor DiCiano. Head Councillor Nunziata next.
Yes, thank you, Heather. And I know you have a project in my ward, and I just hope you get started on it. It's been quite a while. So just want to ask you a question. So in Ward 11, you do have a project. It's vacant. It's a vacant land. Been vacant for a number of years. Old warehouse. So right now, you're working on, and we have had public meetings on developing that site. So at this point, there is no fees collected by the city because there's no development. Right. Right? So.
Well, no, we pay property tax on that.
No, you pay property tax, but if you were to build nothing on that site and that your application doesn't go through, there would be no revenue at all to the city for development charges.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So asking for an exemption would actually benefit the city because we would get revenue that we never did have, correct?
We're not asking for an exemption. What we're asking for is that the DCs be deferred, so that rather than them being paid at the time of building permit, they're in effect paid by the purchaser when they sell the unit. So what we do is we would blend that deferral amount with our own second mortgage, and that gets paid out when the purchaser sells the unit. So it's not, so the city will receive the money, it just is deferred until the sale of the unit.
Yeah, so, but do you agree that in some parts of the city where it's very, really is in much need of revitalization and where we have vacant buildings, and that we should have incentives to revitalize the area and develop and get some revenue into the city rather than leave all these vacant buildings?
Absolutely, and I think what this across-the-board DC increase does is it makes it much more difficult to develop. We have a site in Scarborough that we're looking at seriously, but if the DCs increased 100% right now, we would drop that site because we can't capture that. We will not, we can't capture that full value.
Right.
So it is going to, like sites like Weston, where there is a desire for revitalization, it makes it much more difficult because we're not going to see big price gains in that area that we can make up.
And in Mount Dennis too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata. I had any other members that are visiting with us today from outside the committee? Okay, if not, we'll go to the committee members, and I had Councillor Shiner, Deputy Mayor Bylaw, Councillor McMahon, so we have those three to start with, and so Councillor Shiner, it's your turn.
Hi, Heather.
Hello.
I've only got 3 minutes. You're asking us to defer payment of DCs,
Right,
not require the payment of DCs, correct?
right.
And we've done that on a number of projects. We defer it until the unit is resold at market.
Yes, yes.
So what we're doing is assisting with lowering the cost while it's an affordable unit.
Right.
But we're recapturing all that money at the end.
And plus appreciation. So if the unit goes up by 10%, you're receiving your initial investment back plus 10%.
Now, when you have to pay DCs, do you pay it as your organization, or do you pass it on to the purchaser of the unit as part of the price?
It is part of the price of the unit, yes.
So that's paid for by the purchaser.
Right.
The question was raised, and I appreciate my colleague's question. It's a very competitive industry out there for land, isn't it now?
Yes, it is.
Are you able to actually find land often at a cost that you can afford?
We have a number of sites right now that are, so yes, we are. And we do a number of different arrangements. So we have an active kind of site that we're looking at with Build. We have.
You have a site that you recently entered into an agreement on.
Yeah, we have.
Did you pay the full market price for that and be competitive, or were you able to come close to the market price?
We came very close to the market price.
Second time around?
Yeah. We also have.
So the question I have then is, increase in construction costs, increase in development charges, increase in interest rates, has that in any way lowered the cost per square foot of developable land?
I don't see that. It's not happening. Look at the prices of land have gone in the opposite direction.
So what you're doing as a non-for-profit is you have to compete with the for-profit that don't have a maximum price threshold on their unit, where you have a maximum price threshold based on affordability. Is that correct?
We do not.
Like you can't, there's a target for affordable housing.
Oh, you
Right.
do it, yeah, no, I know exactly.
What is that?
The target for
Watch
Hope
my time,
dollars
which
is $90,000 per family income per year.
And there's a maximum they can afford to finance.
Yes, yes,
So above that, if the house gets more expensive, then they can't afford the house.
correct.
So if we increase the costs on that by increasing our DCs or charging them instead of deferring them, that can put the cost of home ownership with the additional pressures of land and other escalation costs out of the reach of those that wish an affordable house.
Absolutely.
And that's why you're asking us, could we please defer with an increase in the DCs as it goes forward, but defer the collection until that house becomes a market house,
Yeah.
not an affordable house?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
I will also say that we did a bit of an analysis, and for a two-bedroom unit, the DC deferral enables a family with an family income of $7,000 per year less to purchase that unit. So rather than having $87,000 worth of family income, a family with $80,000 can now purchase that unit if the DCs are deferred on a two-bedroom unit.
Sorry, having some technical issues here,
okay.
but thank you very much, Councillor Shiner, and that would bring us next to Deputy Mayor Bylaw.
Very quickly, so the HOPE program, I think, was initially created to do exactly that.
Right.
It's basically a defer program that gives you the $25,000, which at some point in time were the development charges. And so once the purchaser sells the unit, that part of the mortgage comes back to the
Right,
city.
absolutely.
So basically what you're asking us today is basically to increase that program.
Yes.
So so to continue that program, because we are deferring,
Yeah.
the issue is right now that the program does not pay for what the increase is, and it has a limit of 100. So you're basically asking us to increase the program.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bylaw. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in this morning, Heather. So you're saying that the 100% increase is not ideal for options for homes. What would be ideal?
I mean,
Increase.
I think we're trying to, ideally, we would have a DC deferral for all of our units. What we're asking for is a deferral of the increase.
Okay.
Because we recognize, we're not sitting here thinking that affordable housing is the only priority of the city. What we're saying is that kind of meet us part way and defer what the increase in these DCs. Right now, all of our pro formas, we have a number of projects that are kind of late in development stages, and they all are carrying pro formas with some increase, but not 100% increase. That will have a dramatic effect on projects and projects going forward. So we're saying defer the increased amount in the DCs, which will come back to the city as in due course. So.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Thompson was next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
So there are a number of different elements with respect to cost of affording a home. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And you're here asking, just so it's clear to me, the current DCs that are part of what's required for you to pay, you're fine with that?
Yeah, we're saying,
You're
we're asking for a
For
deferral.
the additional increase that may come
Yeah.
as part of this process, you're simply saying to defer that to a later date.
Yeah.
That date is when the property is sold.
When the first purchaser sells that unit.
So what happens if that doesn't happen?
It will, I mean, it will happen.
So that your record and your information suggests that typically that happens.
Typically, that happens before 7 years of ownership,
Right.
on average for our units.
And the deferred payment, if we were to allow that, is paid back to the city.
Yeah.
You get your second
We
mortgage.
get our portion of the second
Right.
one. Yeah.
And whatever is left over, accrued profits, goes to the homeowner?
Yes.
Okay. How is the new stress test, the 2% on mortgage, how is that impacting your clients?
The average increase in family income,
Right.
say a two-bedroom unit, the stress test has increased the qualifying income by between $10,000 and $13,000 a year. On a three-bedroom, it's closer to $20,000 a year. So it really is, it has had a huge impact on.
In addition to these sort of additional charges or costs
Yeah.
to affordability.
Yeah.
And so what you're also saying to us here today, if I'm hearing you correctly, we have a problem right now in terms of affordability in the city. The element of the stress tests, the DCs, and additional cost of affordable is going to make it more problematic for people to be able to own a home in the city of Toronto.
It's a bit of a perfect storm. I mean, everything is kind of coming together and making the kind of qualifying incomes radically different than they were even 2 years ago.
Right. So it's either defer or pay later for those who will be coming to us saying, we have no shelter,
Yeah.
we need housing and so on, and that will be an additional stress.
Or
on
you're
us.
trying to produce more rental, which is a lot more expensive to
Right.
produce. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just two very quick questions. So, as I understand it, by asking for a deferral, you're asking that the money be recovered by the city, the development charges be recovered by the city, let's say 10 years down the road, and the city would forego interest.
No, I'm not saying that. The way it works is that your monies, so we're going to provide 15% of the value of the unit to that purchaser as our support.
No, I understand. You're saying the appreciation value is going to more than offset the interest.
If you give me a second, I'll just explain this. So we're going to provide our funds. What we do is then we take the DC value that the city's providing, we bundle that together in one second mortgage that goes on title, and then when the purchaser sells that unit, they pay back that second mortgage, and then we provide the money to the city. So on average, as I mentioned in my deputation, the average increase, per annum increase in the value of the DC deferrals that we currently have on our books has been 12%. So in many ways, it's actually a very good investment. Are you getting 12% in many other investments right now?
No, I understand. So you're saying the appreciation in the property will more than offset.
Yeah.
So the second question is, rather than recover these development charges on a sale-by-sale basis, why not have the city, let's say, defer receipt of development charges for 10 years, and then, because most of the units will have sold over a 10-year period, then have all the DCs recoverable by the city after that 10-year period? Like, just to sort of make it more efficient.
I mean, if the city wants to do something like that, or, I mean, the alternative is to kind of, and we've been thinking about this ourselves, is to say maybe you defer for 10 years, or maybe you defer for longer, and that gets built into the longer-term affordability of those units. I mean, we'd be quite open to a conversation about how do we jointly support longer-term affordability in those units. We're completely up for that conversation.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor DeGiorgio. That was the end of the speakers list I had. Is there anybody else that wants to speak? Or ask questions, rather, of this deputant? Sorry. Okay, well, Mr. Rain, thank you very much. Very helpful, and your work is helpful as I've seen with my own eyes, and we appreciate what you're doing in your organization very much. Thank you. Next, another organization that's doing a lot of good work, and that's Habitat for Humanity Greater Toronto. Ian Underwood is here, CEO. There you are. 3 minutes for the deputation. I'm sure there may be some questions. Thank you for coming.
Good morning. As you heard, my name's Ian. I've met a number of you, CEO at Habitat GTA. And as you know, Habitat for Humanity is a charity. So as such, a major source of the funds for us to build the homes we build are coming from private donations, from individuals and from businesses. And I cannot tell you the number of conversations I've had with donors where they express first surprise and then disappointment in realizing that on average 23% of the cost of building Habitat homes is consumed by government fees. Not all of them are municipal, but 23% by government fees. Our donors are surprised to learn that while affordable housing rental projects in Toronto experience relief from development charges and other fees, as you were reminded today, affordable ownership organizations like Habitat for Humanity pay the full freight. They find it counterintuitive to then learn that the formula for development charges actually includes a component of for affordable housing, and yet they, as donors, are paying, are contributing to both development fees to build affordable houses. Now, we have in our build pipeline land opportunities through which we can deliver another 200 Habitat homes in the next 5 years. The development charges on those homes at the current rate would be $5.3 million. At the new rate will be $10.5 million. And again, let's be clear. That's $10.5 million that we will raise from private donations from individuals and businesses who recognize that government alone can't solve the unprecedented problems of affordable housing facing the city. Now, to quantify the impact of that, under the new rates, for every 6 Habitat homes we build, the development charges on those homes equate to a 7th home that we will not be able to build. So I think it's important to talk about the impact of when we build a Habitat home, what does that do for us as a city? So as you know, and as Heather reminded you, for every home, for every Habitat home or nonprofit affordable ownership home we build, we free up a much needed affordable rental unit. We generate new property taxes, which in the case of Habitat homeowners now equates to $1.2 million annually from Habitat owners in the GTA. We create a publicly funded capital maintenance backlog for those homes of 0 because the families themselves are responsible for maintaining the homes. And so then if we flip things around and look at this from the city's vantage point, the $10.5 million that Habitat will pay for development charges in the next 5 years represents 0.01%, less than 0.01% of the development charges that the city can collect from overall residential builds. So we are asking you as a city to consider a freeze on development charges at current levels, or as you heard from our counterpart, a deferral. And we would actually encourage you use this opportunity for a full deferral of all fees. And similar to what you heard before, that will come back to the city with appreciation later, so there's still funds for infrastructure down the road.
All right.
I know I'm up at time.
On that, yes, thank you so much for that. And thanks for the deputation. Now, there are questions of this deputant. Do I see Councillor Campbell?
Hi, good morning. How many homes do you build a year?
So we are currently building, this year we had activity underway on about 50 homes. We completed about 30 homes. We've been scaling up over the last several years. So as I said, we have 200 homes in Toronto to build in the next 5.
How much do people pay for those homes?
Pardon?
How much?
So because we're a charity, CRA guidelines require that homeowners are buying them at full market value. So currently, the homes we're selling are probably averaging about $550,000. They're stacked townhomes. Okay. Again, a lot of people don't realize the way we are making this affordable is we, Habitat, are also the mortgage holder. So picking up on some of the questions that were asked by Councillor Thompson, Councillor Shiner before, there's a cap on the incomes of the families that qualify for Habitat homeowners. And there's a mortgage calculation so that the mortgage payment for them is always affordable. Issue for us is the more we are paying as Habitat to build those homes, the fewer homes we can build, the less relief from the pressures and affordable rental that the city is spending a lot of time focusing on.
So they're sold to the purchaser at market value.
Yes.
But can it really be full market value if you put a cap on the incomes? It has to be less than market value, I think. So they're sold at full market value. Habitat homeowners take on a 20-year Habitat for Humanity mortgage. The payments are calculated annually based on 30% of household income. So that households are never paying more than 30% of their income on shelter. And do they ever pay off the house?
At the end of 20 years, they are required then to refinance, if they want to remain in the home, to then go get a conventional mortgage to refinance. Or they can sell the home and pay us out of the proceeds. Same would be true for if there was a deferred development charge in there. At the end of that 20-year term, that would become due.
So you would look for a deferral of this, of these DCs. Is that what you're recommending, or just?
Yeah, we believe the rational and economic approach here is a deferral. So that the city is getting the benefit of development charges for infrastructure, but in the process is lowering the cost of delivering homes today so that we can deliver more homes and provide more relief on the rental supply. And again, just to remind you, these are households at $45,000, $50,000 of employment income.
Right.
38% of them are living in subsidized housing today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Did I have any other members visiting? Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Mayor. So just so I think the committee's clear, you're just asking for a deferral for not-for-profit home builders. Is that correct? Or you're asking for a deferral across the board?
We're asking for a deferral for non-profit deliverers of affordable ownership housing. And again, so those are agents that are providing a cap on the income. And I think your questions earlier to the last deputant was getting at this a bit. This is a very small subset of the total residential activity that will be out there.
Right. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor DiCiano. Any other members of council that are not on the committee? Okay, members of the committee wishing to ask questions. All right, thank you to the deputant. Thank you very much for your continuing work as well in the community. Much appreciated. I'm sorry? Did you have a question? All right, thank you. Daryl Chong, President, CEO, Greater Toronto Apartment Association. Welcome. You have 3 minutes. We thank you for being here.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, committee members. As you know, the Greater Toronto Apartment Association represents the owners and managers excuse me, of over 150,000 units of purpose-built rental in the Greater Toronto area, with the vast majority of them in the City of Toronto. I'm going to use this. I submitted a letter as well. That's probably difficult to see. The planning department comes out every year with a how does the city grow stat sheet. And if you can see the numbers or refer to the letter I submitted, you'll see that over the last, the top component is from April of 2017. Over the last 5 years, 6,300 units of purpose-built rental were built in Toronto. That's an average of 1,200 units a year. And if you slide down the previous block of a few years, and I'm sorry if that's out of focus, shows the same. That's the city stat. I've expanded it to, that's for the last 20 years. It's more important to focus on the bottom. An average of 831 units of purpose-built rental in the City of Toronto. that's a staggering statistic or number based on, the size of and growth of the city over the last 20 years and so on. There's exemptions to industrial and office towers for DCs. There's exemptions for other categories. I'm here to say that we could make it doable probably with exemptions, but in the current proposed state, if you look at these numbers and then you double the DCs on these projects, you can look at downstream from here, there'll probably be zeros across the board. Last year's 1,088 units were barely doable with the former set of DCs or the current DCs. When you double them, they're gone. So it really depends on how badly the city wants purpose-built rental. I know you have a program in place through the Open Door program for affordable. I'm requesting that you take a serious look at expanding the parameters of that to get to mid-market rental. And just to remind you that today's mid-market rental is tomorrow's affordable units. Most of the units in Toronto today that were built in the 60s and 70s were at the high end, and now they're some of the most affordable units across the city. So I'd be looking for some exemptions or discounts on DCs. Maybe look at changing the formula. Right now it's a linear formula, so if you look at the difference between a 2-bedroom unit and a 1-bedroom unit, it's almost double, and you wonder why people only build 1-bedroom units. And I hear the challenge is that there are not enough family-size units, but it's counterintuitive. You pay a whole lot more to get to that second bedroom as a developer. Section 37, I would suggest that purpose-built rental is a community benefit and should be availed all the benefits as such. Property taxes, there's an IMIT eligibility program that you have. It's item number 6 today. I'm on the deputants list. I'm not going to speak. I'm just going to say what I was going to say then. Expand apartments as an eligible use of land to qualify for IMIT.
I'll have to ask you to conclude there on that note because there may be a question that will allow you to make another comment. Are there questions of Mr. Chong? Councillor DiCiano, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Chong, for coming in. I believe we have a letter here from you as well. I'm going to try and work backwards here. You would agree with me that the market determines the price, and I'm not talking rental right now, but you would agree with me that the market determines the price of a home ultimately?
Well, I'm not the expert in home ownership, but I would say that's probably fair. Yeah, it's fair.
It's fair. So developers couldn't just simply, if development charges went up, they couldn't simply just put an extra $30,000 on the price of a unit if the market determined the cost. Is that correct?
So when you're building an apartment, the developer bears all those costs, and they have to build in that extra $30,000 over a number of years to pay down the mortgage. There's no pre-sale in an apartment scenario. You're not selling to...
No, I understand. I'm just trying to because as an apartment owner, or when you were to build, you'd be buying land at market value. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So given that you agree with me that the market determines the price of a home, it's safe to say that the developer simply can't just add that, extra $20,000 or $30,000 onto the price. They have to somehow figure out there's got to be another variable cost that they can reduce, because if the affordability of a unit's $400,000, they can't just say, okay, it's $430 now because no one's going to buy their product. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, if you look at the table up on the board, right now we're barely building because we can't make the pro forma work, even with the current DC. So to add another $25,000 or $30,000 for a 2-bedroom unit just kills the model.
Okay.
It doesn't work.
But what I'm trying to get to is that if development charges increase, the only thing that happens is the price of raw land goes down. Do you agree or not agree with that statement? So in essence, you as a builder of apartment buildings would, given that you're paying in the market, would pay less for land. That's the only variable cost when you, as an apartment builder, build. Your construction costs are the same, your softs are the same, your hard costs are the same. The only thing in order for you to build, and it's somewhat similar to for-profit development, is that your variable cost is land, is it not? Like in Mississauga, in Brampton, and in Oakville, concrete is the same price, labor is the same price. The only difference is the variable cost. It's land. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know if it's a linear relationship. If the development charge goes up by X, that the land value comes down by X.
Well, then how are people supposed to make money if they can't add that price to the final cost of the unit?
Well, so
They're just going to have to pay less for land, isn't that correct?
well, speaking from the apartment perspective, it doesn't work in most cases. We don't even bother. The stats will show 1,000 units a year in a city with 2.8 million people, starving, and most of them unable to purchase a home now, still don't have a lot of viable rental options.
Okay, so if you're paying...
Actually, sorry, Councillor, that was your last question.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. We just got to keep moving here. We have Councillor... okay, oh yes, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A quick question. So you're the president and CEO of the Greater Toronto Apartment Association. Does that go beyond Toronto's borders? Does that include Mississauga and Richmond Hill? So what's the apartment construction market like in Mississauga?
We're building fewer outside of Toronto than inside of Toronto.
And what's it like in Richmond Hill?
I think all of York Region had one building last year.
One building. Okay.
250 units.
Okay, thank you.
Approximately.
Any other members not on the committee asking questions? All right, then we go to Councillor Burnside and Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the name of the game on rental is actually affordable rental, right?
Affordable rental is based on the average market rents using CMHC's tables. The problem with that table is they calculate all the rents of buildings that were largely built before 1975 and say this is the average rent for 40-year-old product, and if you want to qualify for affordable today, you have to be at that average or below 40-year-old product.
Yeah,
building a brand new product with new amenities and new services, which really isn't comparable, but that's what they use.
Right, sorry, but I guess the point is, from a political standpoint, we're looking at increasing affordable housing.
Right.
Whether it's rental or otherwise, correct?
The city's created a really good program called the Open Door Policy.
You know, I don't need to only because I have 3 minutes, I don't want to be rude, but I just need to direct. So the idea is to create affordable housing, whether it's rental or otherwise, correct? From a political standpoint, you kind of see that's...
No, I don't agree with that. I think creating more housing is the goal of the city council, to give people options.
Okay.
Not everyone needs affordable housing, but a lot of people that should have moved out of units that are affordable are not doing so because there's nowhere to go.
Okay, so fair enough, out of your, well, I don't know if there's nowhere to go, but out of your 831 units, what's the average rental price?
I think right now it's about $1,200 a month for a one-bedroom in the city of Toronto.
Of the 831 that were built?
No, this is per year on average for the last 20 years, but I'm talking...
Sorry, I'm not asking that. What I'm asking, and I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm trying to get to a point. Of the 831 units on average that have been built over the last 20 years, I think that was the stat you put up. So I'm going by your stats. I'm trying to address that. What was the average rental price?
The CMHC publishes that. I think it's about $1,200, and that's...
For those new units?
That's all the units. They don't separate them by year of construction. That's...
Okay, so you don't have, so the answer is you're not sure.
You're asking me of the 1,200 units that were built last year, what the average rents are?
Okay, fair enough.
I would assume substantially higher than 1,200, but I'm not sure.
So okay, and then that leads me to my last question. Do you see a benefit in high-end rental? Like, should council be differentiating? So with these development charges, the proposed increases, I mean, I think most of council would get their head around, hold on for a sec. Hey, Justin, excuse me? Most of would get their head around some deferral or whatever the case is for lower cost rental units. But do you see, is it your proposition that even if you're building purpose-built rental at $5,000 for a two-bedroom, that you should also?
No. My recommendation is to expand essentially what you do with Open Door, which is affordable, below average market rents, to what we call mid-market, which is up to 1.5 times average.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Burnside. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to Councillor DeCiano's line of questioning regarding the increasing development fees and putting downward pressure on property values. My sense is that many of the purpose-built rentals now are being built on large parcels of land long paid for and debt-free, and we're intensifying existing parcels. We're not actually looking for new land to develop a lot of these purpose-built rentals. So the logic that prices will go down doesn't really affect today's market trends. Is that something you've?
Yes, Councillor. Most of the projects that do go forward are on infill projects where the developer already owns the land, but the city's planning department is making it much more difficult to infill.
Much more difficult?
Much more difficult to infill. They came up with a new set of parameters that make it prohibitive to infill.
Such as?
Height, density, shadowing, requirements to build daycare centers on site, all sorts of things. There's a litany of things.
Usually there's a Section 37 agreement or section which
there's still section
might include a daycare, but
this is over and above that.
What you're asking for here is a two-tiered system between, let's say, condominium ownership and purpose-built rental. Is that when we drill right down to what we're looking at as far as changing this package before us, that's what we're looking at?
I'm just basically saying, if you look at the numbers, we barely build any now. Doubling the DCs will result in probably none. So, I mean, it's very much how badly do you want it? We're hardly doing any. And if you sincerely want it, then you might want to look at some other incentives. And this is not the be-all and end-all. DCs, just a straight deferral of DCs won't be enough. We'd have to tag in IMET, some Section 37, all those things that are contemplated and used under the open door program should be reviewed, maybe not to the same extent, but all of those things in that basket of financial incentives should be looked at.
So we need one set of DCs for purpose-built rental and another set of DCs for, let's say, ownership, condominium ownership. Is that?
I'm not exactly sure how you would frame it, but if you look at all the things that the city charges for development of an apartment building, to look at all of those things, add them all up and see what you can discount.
And I guess assumption of risk is another thing. We won't be able to get developers or investors in if there's too much risk when it comes to high development charges on purpose-built rental. Is that the rate of return is just not worth it?
All the risk is borne by the developer. There's no pre-sale of anything, so you need to borrow money to buy land if you have land that helps, but then you need a construction loan, which you're going to have to come up a third of that at least on your own, without any pre-sales, without any contracts in hand to take to a lending institution. It is challenging.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. That was the last questioner. Sorry, Councillor Bylaw and Councillor DeGiorgio.
Just a quick question. I mean, I've seen this chart before, but I was very curious to see that on Urbanation, they actually come out and say that there's about 6,000 units under construction right now, which might sound like a lot, and it's good that that number is up there, but we still need more, correct?
That's 6,000 over the next 4 years. So if you divide them, and most of those, I think, about 2,000.
Under construction.
Under construction.
So they'll come online in the next 4 years?
Yeah, some of them have just started, and some of them are close to completion. I think there's about 2,000 that will be opened in 2017, and there might be some more additions. Okay. But these are projects that were done barely doable before the DC increase, or proposed increase.
Okay. So I think there's clearly a conversation that needs to happen between the team, and that we're just going into consultation. So I think that you would welcome to work with city staff on seeing how the impact of these increase would have in the industry. Can we count on you to have that kind of conversation?
Absolutely. I've been working with Rob and Shirley and Joe and the team for months now, and they're open to hearing what we have to say, and they understand the concerns.
And I understand that very often you ask for the deferrals, but I've also heard something that one of the major issues on rental is cash flow. That you really, you know, when you build a condo, you go in, you put your money, get your money out, and off you go. The expenses when you build a rental building is, you know, it takes a lot longer. You have to amortize, oh God. Exactly, over a long period of time. Would a program that would help you with that in the city, a phasing in approach, could that be something that could be at the table?
The IMET program is a sort of a deferral of property taxes. That helps with cash flow. So that is such an example of a program that helps with ongoing cash flow.
So those are the kinds of conversations that you're looking forward to having over the next couple of months to address an issue that nobody can dispute. The vacancy rate is way too low in the rental market in the City of Toronto, correct?
Yeah, I've tabled sort of the wish list down at the bottom of my letter, and you can see from the last 20 years we haven't built anything really. So that's why the vacancy rate is so low in the growing city.
Great.
You finished there, Deputy Mayor? Okay, Deputy Mayor Barlow is finished, so we move on to Councillor DeGiorgio.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chong, I think we can agree that ever since the introduction of rent controls that there are very little rental buildings being built. On the high end, we know that the secondary market, that is to say the construction of condominiums, and then a lot of the condominium units are rented out. That's really the supply of the rental at the higher end. On the purpose-built rental housing, that's all channeled through the affordable housing, and there are all sorts of incentives available there. So I guess my question is this. Given that development charges that apply today to rental units or to rental buildings, and given the payback over a long period of time as enunciated by Councillor Bylaw, what kind of an impact from an incentive point of view will a doubling of development charges have on the supply of that kind of housing? If it's not being supplied today, how does a doubling of development charges?
So we've only been building 1,200 a year for the last 10 years on average. We'll probably go down to close to zero, except for the units that come through the open door program.
When you say 1,200 a year, are you saying in Toronto?
Yep, City of Toronto.
Has been building 1,200 rental units. Does that include affordable rental units or just?
Everything.
Okay, and I'm trying to differentiate between the two categories. What I'm saying is, if you take away the affordable units that are being built, the purpose-built rental units, how many actual rental units have been built over the last decade?
Most of them were, I mean, there was a big chunk in post-2008 when the feds put out the infrastructure money after the financial collapse in the banking industry. So there was that build money that came out, and that was, that's the blip up in there from 2009 to 2012. So those were affordable, but.
Okay, but again, affordable. What I'm saying is if I'm a developer, why would I want to build rental housing when I can build condominiums, you know, where the return is up front? Why would I want to build rental housing?
People build, or companies build rental housing because that's what they do. It's the business they're in. That's what they've been doing for a long time. They know it.
All right, now you're getting to, and I appreciate what you're saying. So now we're talking about if somebody owns a lot of properties where they have rental housing in because they had it, let's say, from 30, 40 years ago, and we look at intensification of those sites where they add additional rental buildings on a site that has rental buildings where they already own the land, then maybe that's, so what kind of an impact does the doubling of development charges have on those people? Forget about somebody acquiring land and building rental buildings. That's out of the equation.
Right. So even in those cases, and that's even right now, that's the case. A lot of the landowners, a lot of the apartment owners own land for infill opportunities, and the numbers that they're building are still right here. They're still not building. The numbers still don't work, and the doubling of DCs kills.
So the 1,200 includes those properties as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. All right, that was your last question. Thanks, Councillor DeGiorgio. Councillor Shan.
Thanks for giving us a real background of what you try to do. But can you clarify for me what your ask is of the committee and of council in 30 seconds or less?
Absolutely. That we sit down in earnest and get together with perhaps the mayor and staff to look at, this is the wish list that I've bulleted, to see how we could take the bones of the open door program and morph them a little bit, not the full exemptions that you give for affordable, but morph them a little bit and look at extending that to what we call mid-market affordable.
What's mid-market?
CMHC defines it as up to 1.5 times of affordable or average market rent.
Which is what monthly rate of rental currently?
I think for a one-bedroom, the average market rent in Toronto, correct me if I'm wrong, is about $1,200 a month. So up to 1.5 times, that would be $1,800 a month.
So you're looking to be able to see how you can provide assistance by a deferral or an exemption?
It's one or the other or a combination. And it's not just the DCs. I mean, I'm taking this opportunity.
I understand that, but we're talking DCs today, so I'm only listening to you for DCs right now.
So
then let me
partial exemption.
Okay. So you're talking about identifying a section that currently isn't identified. So if you fit in the affordable category, you have a program. If you're wealthy, you have a program because you have your own money. If you're not wealthy and you're in that middle market and you're making over that $80,000 a year as a family, you're saying you have a problem and you're looking to help there. Now, if you go ahead and add in the cost for a 2-bedroom unit of $51,740 a year in development charges, that goes on the bottom line cost and you have to amortize that in your monthly rents?
Yes.
So the carrying cost of that, if it was a mortgage at just over 3%, it was $3,000 a year.
Okay.
$250 a month. So that impacts that rental from these DCs to at least an increase of $250 a month. Am I correct?
I think your math sounds sound, yes.
So that's what your impact in. And the other question is, if you have a 300-bedroom unit building and your average DC would come in at $40,000, then you're talking over $10 million worth of development charges, which I believe that you're looking at ways to possibly even defer that until after the building is up and rented instead of when it's under construction?
A deferral at the least, I'd be looking at partial exemption, a waiver.
Okay, and the goal is to be able to provide more affordable housing to those people that don't fit within the affordable housing category.
Right, we call it workforce housing or the middle income housing. It's not at the high end, it's not defined as affordable by CMHC, it's average working people.
You talking with staff now?
Yes.
And you think we can get forward with something?
Thanks.
I think they need direction from council or the committee.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Shannon. Is that to bring to an end the questions that this deputy did? All right, well, Mr. Chong, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Howard Paskowitz. Good day, sir.
Good morning,
Thank you for
Mr.
coming.
Mayor,
You have 3 minutes.
Council. My name is Howie Paskowitz. I am Director of Development for Starlight Investments. I would like to start by commending this council for all the work it's done to encourage new rental development. I'm proud to have played a role in contributing over 2,000 new rental units over the past several years in the City of Toronto. In my opinion, this proposed increase will have a very detrimental impact on new rental construction. The rental housing supply issue is a supply and demand issue, and that means that more than just a handful of some very valuable affordable housing projects are required to address it. We need to increase the supply of rentals at all levels, as I think some of my colleagues have mentioned. For this, I would ask that Council would consider establishing a new asset class within the development charge, which would allow for some form of a discount or reduction on the amount of development charges required to be paid for new rental housing. Like every investment decision, it's a balance of risk and reward. I think we're starting to see, as the cranes are showing and new rental housing is coming on stream, that balance is slowly tilting to make it worthwhile to invest in that sector. I believe with this new proposed DC increase, that trickle is going to come to a halt, and there won't be any new rental construction other than potentially at the very high end. I do have some numbers here. I'm happy to share the numbers behind the numbers with you. I took 2 projects that we're looking at right now. One's a North York infill project, one's an Etobicoke infill project. So therefore, there's no cost of land here at all. And when I run the numbers, and again, I'm happy to share the numbers behind these numbers with you, the DC increase on both projects is about $5 million. And as you can see, and as most people have a required investment threshold, for the North York project, we have to hit a 5.01% return. Under the current DC regime, we can actually make 5.17%. So we're not talking astronomical returns, but we're talking a return that would justify doing the project. When I run the numbers and look at the proposed DC increase of over $5 million, I'm down at 4.16%, which makes this project a no-go. So instead of the city getting an increase of $5 million in DCs, it'll actually cost the city the initial $5 million that I was looking to put in to this project. Etobicoke, similarly, slightly lower return required. There too, it brings me below the required threshold in order to move forward on this investment. And that project's actually already in the rezoning process, so that's a real project that at this point cannot go forward. What I'm requesting is your consideration that we examine the opportunity or ways to bring in a new asset class for new rental. I've heard some concerns that how do you secure tenure? It's something that's being done now with Section 37 agreements. All the affordable housing projects I've done are also secured on title, so it's something that can be done. This council and the city uses development charges to incentivize certain types of developments, such as office and industrial, and I'd like to ask for your consideration to do the same for new rental housing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paskowitz. Is there a question to Councillor Carroll?
Yes. So you're not asking that we make no change, not ever, but your concern is exactly this purpose-built rental. Is there room to sit down with the growing community of people who are now interested in purpose-built rental to find some balance between DCs and achieving what we want to achieve in terms of inclusionary zoning, affordable rental? Are you offering to come to that table as well?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of tools that you can put in your toolbox, and I think that it would be a great idea to find a way to make this work. I'm not trying to suggest that growth shouldn't pay for growth. I agree with staff, but there needs to be a balance, and I think these are only two examples, and again, I'm happy to share all these numbers with whoever wants more information. These projects cannot proceed if the current proposed DC goes through.
So we could use a number of formulas if the legislation permits, so that if we were looking at the difference between, you know, a building that can hold 250 units versus, you know, you're talking about purpose-built townhouse rental, that we have almost zero of that. So we can achieve affordable rental there. We can achieve relief for some families. So some balance between housing types, development charges, and our inclusionary zoning ambitions is something you'd be willing to look at.
I agree, but I just want to clarify that these aren't going to be at the affordable levels. These aren't super high end. These are at
the moment, yeah.
At the moment, and I think there's ways to achieve all these goals, like the inclusionary zoning. The inclusionary zoning, which my understanding would be a certain number of units within buildings. These buildings can't go ahead, so I don't know, you know, I think we would completely miss our goal of providing inclusionary zoning.
Thank you.
Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Howard, for coming in. Just to go through your pro forma again, you made a comment that your land was zero. How did that happen?
So these are infill projects. These are buildings that were built several years ago, and while probably if you wanted to be really accurate, you'd have to allocate a portion of what that land cost was to these new projects. In this case, I've run these numbers putting all the land cost on the existing buildings.
Why would you do that? By doing that, you're just coming here and showing us you're not making any money, when in fact you're taking land that you probably paid $300,000 an acre, and now you're selling them for $300,000 a lot. So why don't you show us the tens of millions you're making on the land costs?
I'm not selling these. These are rental, and I think actually these numbers would be even worse. So if I was able to achieve a 5.17% return before, that would only get lower because my costs would go up. So in this case, and that North York project, I'd have to allocate several $1 million to my costs, which would make my return even more negligible.
But the market right now, so in the fourth quarter of 2017, according to Urban Nation, 27,500 purpose-built rentals were in the planning department as proposed, 27,500. Are you saying all those proposed units had land that was already in the inventory? They're going out and buying market land, aren't they?
No, in some cases, people are buying raw land and they're building brand new apartment buildings.
And they're making money at it, or they wouldn't do it. Is that correct?
I would imagine most people wouldn't do it if they weren't making money, correct?
Okay, so thank you for that. So at the end of the day, if development charges, and I think this committee understands there's going to be a transition period for those who are already in the application process, but starting tomorrow, if we implement this, and we double development charges, would you pay the same amount for land if you didn't have land in your inventory and you wanted to build purpose-built? Would you pay the same price for land, or would you pay less?
So your argument, I think, is a good one for raw land. I'm particularly looking at these infill projects and looking at Starlight, our portfolio. We're not buying raw land.
No, I know you already own it free and clear.
We already own it. So right. These projects. But I'm saying people that compete with you to build rental are paying $100, $125, $150 per lot or per unit for the land. So you're not, because you already own it. So when you show us that you're only making 4%, on your development side, you're making millions. So why shouldn't, like, who's going to pay the infrastructure costs of this city as we grow if we're deferring these costs for everybody? These are my development returns. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by the...
You haven't put your land in there, though.
my return would get less.
No, it wouldn't. Not on the land side.
Well, I'm happy to go through the, I mean, I think the return is a factor of what you're making minus what you spent. And if I added $10 million of land cost to my expenses, I'd make even less money on my return.
So, sorry, Councillor, once again, that's the last question. We have to just keep moving here. We've got Councillor Deputy Mayor DeBearmaker next here for questions.
Great through you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much for attending today and for your deputation, because I think all of us want to assist your company and others to build rental housing, and certainly ones that meet our affordability targets. And you had said earlier that you believe in growth should pay for growth. So if we gave, say, these examples, and I know they're, one of them's pretty small example, but if in general we gave their rental, when you're building rental, we gave you, say, an exemption. If growth is supposed to pay for growth and you don't pay the DCs that pay for growth, so you're not paying for growth, doesn't that mean that all the people who are in the existing neighborhood will look up at your rental building and say, those are that's the property owner that we're subsidizing, so that that company could make a higher profit on land that's next to our community? So on my street, for example, everybody who lives on my street would be paying a little bit more so that you could make a fair return on your investment. So if you're not going to pay, if growth doesn't pay for growth, what should we do?
I think that's a very good question. I think, firstly, I would start by saying I'm not asking you for a complete waiver of all DCs. I think we need to look at ways the DCs can be used to incentivize growth that wouldn't otherwise happen. By letting us build these new apartment buildings, the city's revenues will increase through property taxes, whereas if these projects don't go ahead, there won't be those increased property taxes. I think I'm looking to find perhaps a balance between growth paying for growth and charging the growth industry so much that there is no growth. We do it with affordable housing. I think that's a very valid use. I've participated in a few programs. A couple councils here know of where I was before and what we did. There's no reason to say that there shouldn't be some form of payment for these DCs. I'm not suggesting it's zero. Zero should stick with the affordable housing. That shouldn't be offered to everyone across the board. So I guess my answer is there's a balance, and while growth should pay for growth, there comes a point, there's a critical point where there's a tipping point where there will be no more new rental added to the city. Some people may still go ahead. I know that these two examples I'll have to shut these projects down.
Because we're limited to 3 minutes.
We have 40 seconds. Go for it.
So if you were building an office complex and you said to me, we're going to pay property taxes so the city nets ahead, I would agree with you. But if you're building rental and those units pay, you will pay property taxes for those units. We don't net ahead as a city. The property taxes are not a revenue stream for the city. It's a revenue stream, but it's a revenue stream that goes to pay all the services that those new residents will require.
So they're covering.
So we're still not paying for growth.
All right. That's the last question there.
Okay. Well, I'll answer that by saying they're paying for the services that these new residents are using, which is in some form of growth paying for growth. You're providing new services because there's new residents. We're paying the property taxes to compensate for the additional services required for those residents.
Okay, thank you.
Did I see your hand up, Councillor Campbell? Yeah, okay, please.
Quick question with no preamble. So just tell me why I'm wrong. If you buy a piece of property and you're hit with these development charges, you're just going to raise your prices. You're just going to raise your rents and pass along to the consumer. That's what happens in the rest of the consumer world.
It happens in the rest of the consumer world, but at some point, because of supply and demand, we will not be able to achieve the rents that we would have to charge in order to make up for the development charges. So I can't build a building at even the nicest part of town and just add $1,000 a month to that and still rent that unit out.
All right, so how much do development charges factor into the price of a rental unit now on a monthly basis?
I don't know the answer because I don't look at it from that perspective.
So
we know ahead of time in a particular market what the market compares.
You must do all of these calculations based on what we're paying now, what you're paying now. You must do all of these calculations as to how much that factors into the price of a unit, and then you charge either $1,600 or $2,000 a month. And I'm suggesting to you, all you're going to do is you're going to pass along this just as you do other costs.
So I would suggest, I think, sort of two things there. One is, the truth is, I don't know that any landlord, when they charge their rent, is actually looking at every individual component as to what makes that rent. I think just like with all other products, if the market can bear it, you'll charge it.
Exactly.
Well, I don't think the market can bear it, and I think in that case, then really what we're doing here is we're punishing the people of Toronto that need good quality rental housing. And what I've just done is across the board of the city is I've increased the market price of all rental. And I don't know that that's the outcome that the city is looking for either.
Okay, that's fine. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor, any other visiting members of council wanting to ask? Okay, well then we next have Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Howard, for coming in. Just following up very quickly on Councillor Campbell's comments, the just pass it on. Isn't the most common theme today in today's real estate market and housing is affordability? And the last thing we want are developers passing it on?
I think so.
So when it comes to Councillor DeChano's comments that who's going to pay for the infrastructure if you get, I guess, a waiver on development charges, isn't most of the infrastructure there when it comes to infill developments? Isn't a lot of the electrical, stormwater management, sewage there? It has to be, I guess, upgraded to some extent, but we're not talking an unserviced open field.
I agree with that statement, and I think that's an important point, which is that for the most part, where new apartment buildings are going is where transit infrastructure already exists. For the most part, renters use public transit. And so really the best places to put these buildings are places where infrastructure perhaps already exists. The cost of upgrading that infrastructure typically falls on the developer. We don't just come to the city and say, you know, please give us a better sewer.
And when it comes to attracting investors into purpose-built rental, I guess they would look at not only the rate of return, but the speed of return?
Yeah, I mean, there's a time value to money, correct?
And when someone's making an investment decision, the speed of return and the rate of return would be better in a condo building than a rental, and that you're looking to us to create incentives to get more investment in purpose-built rental.
I agree with that. It's a different model. The condo investor is different than sort of a long-term cash flow return that a new rental developer is looking for.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Pasternak. Councillor Deputy Mayor Bylaw. Have been answered. Okay. Any other questions of this deputant? If not, again, well, thank you very much, Mr. Paskowitz, and appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
Michael Shelley. Mr. Paskowitz, you had a document that was up on the screen and with a lot of subject and questions, and if it formed part of the written record, it helps us to go back if we're having to look at it. We just don't have a copy of it.
Who would I give that to?
Well, you give it to the clerk here. That would be great. Thank you so much. Michael Shelley? Okay. Martin Gerwin? Good day, sir. Thank you for coming. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the chance to give this presentation. My name is Martin Gerwin. I'm with the Mimico Lakeshore Community Network, and we're here to express the thought that we in favor increased development by increasing development charges by no less than the amount recommended in the report from the interim chief financial officer, and we would recommend a phasing-in period of about 6 months. We think this would give people whose land is already in the pipeline a sufficient time to adjust. Instituting the full amount recommended in this report is particularly important in view of the announcement by the provincial government that the province will fund only 40% of the subsidy for affordable housing. The city is going to be on the hook for 60%. We find in Table 11 in the city's background report that the development charge on a large apartment that will be devoted to affordable housing is to increase from $830 to $4,049. I don't know whether that will be anywhere near enough for the affordable housing that the city so desperately needs, both housing for purchasers and affordable rental housing. But I will certainly need every penny of that $4,000 to face the crisis over affordable housing that the city does now face. I'd like to make a couple of points in support of this. First of all, we're often told that we mustn't kill the goose that lays golden eggs. But in the Corollis report that's prepared for the City of Vancouver and also cited in the city's background study, page 57 is the key page, it's pointed out that the primary impact of increasing development charges is to put downward pressure on the value of properties redevelopment, just as Councillor DiCiano was saying. Because developers can't simply raise the selling price of new houses and apartments if they want to stay competitive. They don't want to settle for a lesser profit margin, and so they lower their bids for land that's ripe for redevelopment. But what does this mean? It means that the golden egg-laying goose that will suffer from increased development charges is not the goose that lays eggs of new revenue for the city. It's the goose that lays eggs of profit for investors who have invested in real estate and speculating in real estate. Well, that goose, well, she's not going to be killed. Not so long as we have such a strongly speculative market in land in the City of Toronto. But it will do no harm at all if that goose is put on a diet and slimmed down a little bit. Secondly, it is worth pointing out that the city does protect services that are vital to the well-being of the community, even when that means restricting rises in land values. Not long ago, Planning and Growth Management Committee in this very room was considering the flight paths that are used by helicopters bringing critically ill patients to hospitals in downtown Toronto. We learned that lawyers with some property owners had some doubts about this, wanted to delay the discussion, presumably because it would impact the air rights and the possibility of future investment in even taller buildings on their property.
I'll have to stop you there and just say we'll see if there are some questions because the 3 minutes are passed by. Thank you very much. Are there some questions of this deputant? Okay, I'm sorry, sir. We just have to keep moving, but thank you very much for the submission. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Joe Deshane Smith, Trillium Housing Nonprofit. Good day, sir.
Good day.
Thank you for coming. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm with Trillium Housing, a nonprofit that delivers ownership housing, similar to Habitat and Options that you heard from earlier. I'll just give a little differentiator. We're really focused on the financing of income-eligible families. If you think in your head of your next-door neighbor, where do they have their first mortgage? You don't know. At our developments, because our financing is through this Trillium mortgage, you don't know which units may have second mortgage support or not, and we think that's a real valid differentiator.
Right now.
I'm going to put aside the prepared notes because Ian and Heather from the nonprofit affordable ownership sector have already gone over most of the reasons why a deferral of development charges would be appropriate. I'm just going to build on that instead. We are accessing the HOPE program and have done so at our most recent project in Councillor DeGiorgio's riding, the Loop, and delivering that support, and it's fantastic. But it was the Plan B when it was set up about 8 years ago. At the time, our preference was to have a deferral program. And this ties back to the presentation earlier where you saw industrial and commercial and they have their waiver. The advantage they have in that situation is they can look at a site and run their pro forma and know in their pro forma the number is 0. If I look at a site, and I have looked at many sites in Toronto, including the Loop, I have to put in the full DC cost. And I have to make my bid on the site based on funding that full DC cost. I do not know until many, many months later whether I will get support from HOPE and whether there will be additional support available. And I don't know how much is available. If you moved the decision to have that funding built into the DC bylaw, just like you do for the providers of new office buildings and industrial, on a deferral basis, then our nonprofits, and it's only a few of us, would have the ability to build that into the land purchase process, where we can say, okay, I'm not paying $50,000 a door in DCs. It's flowed through to the affordability component, and I have a competitive advantage to acquire the appropriate sites for entry-level housing, producing units according to your own programs below the median house price. In Toronto right now, it's about $900,000, but we get below that, and selling them to families below the median income, which right now the threshold, $900,000 was the price point, $90,000. At the Loop, and we sold these units in July, we did 62 townhouses. The average price was about $440,000. 33 purchasers are receiving Trillium mortgages. The average mortgage is about $100,000, including some HOPE dollars of about $20,000 to $25,000 per. That saves them on a monthly basis $480 a month if they had gone out and financed that. The average income there is $66,000 a year for those home purchasers. They're mixed in the whole unit. That income, by the way, is similar to the income of the open door rental, where you're providing a similar grant subsidy. So using the deferral, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just have to ask you to close up. Yeah.
Give it to us up front so that we have clarity to acquire the sites. We'll deliver more housing affordability than you can with any other mechanism that I've seen. I've been around for 20 years now in affordable housing. Government, nonprofits, rental, the whole works.
Thank you. Are there questions of Mr. Duchesne-Smith? Councillor Campbell.
Just a very quick question. Do you operate only in Toronto or in the GTA?
As a finance company, we can operate anywhere. So Toronto, we have 2 projects coming up in Hamilton, one in Pickering. We are looking at a site in London. So Southern Ontario is
Richmond Hill, Mississauga, Richmond Hill, Mississauga, Aurora?
Yeah.
So do you do work?
We do a partnership model with developers, and so we're looking for good developers of entry-level product.
Okay.
And we don't do the entire project for our purchasers. We'll do, in the Loop, it was over 50%. We could be doing 20%. It really depends on how much funding we have available in the projects we're involved in.
Are you completing projects in jurisdictions that have higher development charges than Toronto?
I believe Hamilton is higher, and the city there is working with us to provide DC relief.
Okay.
They have a policy in place. It was really written for rental, but they've agreed that we meet the criteria, and we're working with them to try and deliver it on the ownership side, which will give us exactly the benefits I talked about. It's coming in after the fact, after we acquired the land.
That's good. Thank you.
That.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. Other questions of this deputy? Okay. Well, thank you very much, sir. Much appreciated. Philip Sanford, McCarthy Tetro. Hello, Mr. Sanford. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief indeed. The committee has in front of it a letter my colleague Cynthia McDougall wrote. We're here to express concerns on behalf of Ryerson University. Staff indicated that the university exemption is to be continued. However, staff has recommended to council that the exemption for university residences not be continued. That would have significant implications for students. The model at Ryerson, and I suspect the model generally, is such that there is no provincial support, financial support for student residences. And as you can imagine, most people who live in residences are first-year students. So the implications will be a dollar-for-dollar pass-through of the DCs down to the students. This is a significant policy change, and if I can very, very gently critique the staff report, the rationale is I might say, we would say in my business, it's lightly argued. Ryerson, and I suspect other institutions, would appreciate an opportunity to more thoroughly engage in a discussion on this topic. Particularly the underlying justification that the students make the same demand for city services that everyone else does. The other ask, and again, it's gently made, but staff indicate in the last sentence in their discussion of this issue, they say in some cases the enabling legislation provides a statutory exclusion.
Do it again.
I suspect the university community, and I know that Ryerson would appreciate it if staff were able to enumerate which cases. And those subject to questions, those are Ryerson submissions.
I can tell you, sir, that a bird told me that there's a motion coming forward that will accommodate your desire for some discussions.
I heard the same rumor, and it helped me on my...
So that's a helpful thing to know. Other questions of the deputy? Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your deputation. Just one question for you. We've heard a lot from a lot of different stakeholders today with respect to why we should be deferring development charges. But in a growing city like the City of Toronto, where we're growing leaps and bounds, as you saw through the proposal, who ultimately then is going to pay for the infrastructure required to live in a sustainable, healthy city? Who should pay?
Well, you know, that's essentially a political or moral question, so asking a lawyer one of those questions might, but if you want my answer, we all have to pay, and you folks have an extraordinarily tough job. There's no free lunch. So one way or the other, the question is, should some people pay a little more than others? Should some of us who are perhaps more fortunate pay a little more than others? And I can tell you, as an aging baby boomer, when I look at university students, I think, okay, we've not made the world all that happy for millennials. We should give them a break when we can.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thank you, sir, very much. Okay, now I just want to call again the name of Michael Shelley, because Michael Shelley was listed to appear in this item and has not answered earlier on when his name was called. Michael Shelley? All right, and because this is a special statutorily required hearing and has to prescribe to certain rules, is there anybody else in the room who was not on the list who wishes to be heard on this? Okay, please come forward. You have 3 minutes, sir. Welcome. Nice to see you back.
Okay, Michael Rosenberg.
Yes, Mike.
All I'm going to say is that right now you're looking at charging the development charges on the main floor and exempting the upper floors of office and retail. But I think maybe it should be the other way around. It's the ground floors that are really being hurt by I guess mainly increasing property values or whatever the root causes are. And as the population density in the city increases, what's actually happening to commercial districts is that the ground floor is becoming a premium. It's becoming very expensive for anybody to run either an office or retail at ground floor. So this may be a completely different idea than what you've done in the past, but I would actually seriously consider exempting the development charges for the ground floor and actually reinstating them for all the other floors in office or retail. And you're actually starting to see retail above the ground floor because of the density of the city. And I actually think that we should be encouraging the ground floor and making it easier and cheaper to access ground floor and let the development charges apply above the ground floor.
Thanks, Mr. Rosenberg. Are there any questions of Mr. Rosenberg? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Is there anyone else wishing to be heard on this matter? Yes, please.
Hi, my name's AJ Withers, and I think that anyone that is making any kind of developments in the city right now should be paying. We have a homelessness crisis. As the members of the executive refused to come outside and listen to the people making speeches earlier, didn't hear 880 beds is insufficient. Over 3 years, we need at least 1,000. We actually need 1,500 beds this year. We need them now. 770 people slept in the emergency respite sites the night before last. We need much more resources dedicated to homeless people. Those who have homes should be paying a little bit more for the people who are the most marginalized in this city. And this executive has the choice to actually dedicate resources, to actually push staff, to open the beds that we need. We heard today someone died in Seton House. We're hearing of devastating tragedies day in and day out in the respite sites, on the streets, and in the shelters that are over capacity. We understand that it takes time to open those shelters, which is why we've been coming to you for years, telling you about this crisis, telling you that we need things opened, and now to be told that they can't be opened overnight. We know that. That's why we've been telling you for years. It's on you. You need to pass in this coming budget more beds. We need at least 1,000. We need 1,500 beds this year, not over 3 years. So if that money comes out of developers, that's great. It can come anywhere, but we need the beds. You refuse to hear us outside. That was us being polite, by the way, not coming in. That's how we do things. Sometimes we're polite. We chose to be nice. If we don't get the beds, we can't be nice. We can't watch the people that we care about continue to suffer and continue to die, when the people in this room are the people that can make the choices to have that not happen. If you go to one of those warming centers, if you go to All Saints, and you have to go to the washroom without doors and ask a staff person for toilet paper and maybe they don't have any that day, can you imagine what the city could do to make that better? And the budget contains no resources, it's my understanding, to improve those conditions. That's outrageous. And this city, this executive committee, what you're dedicated to doing is making things easier for developers, to fast track anything for developers, continuing to push poor people out of their homes. Rents skyrocket in this city. People got pushed out. Homelessness is going to keep increasing. If this budget passes and the number of beds go in, what's going to happen is we're going to be years behind in this crisis. And in 3 years, when all of those beds are in place, we're going to have more of a homeless crisis than we could possibly imagine right now. And right now is worse than we could have possibly imagined when we came years ago demanding that we needed shelter beds.
I'll ask you to conclude, Ms. Withers. Thank you for your comments.
I'm
All right.
finished.
Just maybe a question for you. Any questions of the deputy? Okay, thank you very much for coming forward. Again, anyone else that wishes to be heard on this matter? Okay, well then that concludes the deputations, and it would bring us next to questions of staff. And I see Councillor Campbell has his hand up from the visiting members of council. So we'll go ahead with you, Councillor Campbell.
Just very quickly, how would we go about implementing area-specific DCs as opposed to citywide DCs? The report says that it would be difficult to do. I would like to know how we would do that.
The process is somewhat lengthy. It requires us to assess the benefiting areas of different pieces of infrastructure and allocating those costs to those developers within those areas. So oftentimes, I've seen it happen in other municipalities that are greenfield types of municipalities where the costs are readily allocated to those areas, but it is a very, very time-consuming and exercise, and the development community, quite frankly, has suggested that they're prepared to live with the existing uniform charge that's been imposed since amalgamation.
Sorry, so you're saying the development community's fine with, Councillor Fletcher, Paula, sorry, I'm just trying to, sorry, right behind you, right there, sorry, thanks. So the development community doesn't care if they're citywide or if they're area specific, but from a city developing standpoint, we might want to do something to encourage development in, Etobicoke Centre or Scarborough Centre or in, the former city of York or what have you. And how could the city do that, and how would they do that?
So the legislation allows the city to utilize differential charges based on geographic areas.
Okay.
Again, it is an incredibly difficult
task,
thing
right.
to.
And I'm sure you're up to it if we asked you to. So the second question, very quickly, why do you have that the DCs would be paid at the first building permit issuance as opposed to the current above grade issuance?
So the legislation currently allows the city or requires that the city charge upon the issuance of the first building permit. However, to the extent that we are looking at transition provisions that would phase in the charge, we may, there's going to be a fiscal impact on the city, depending on the timing of the actual payment. And so we really want to review that and come back with a recommendation once we've established what the phasing mechanism will be.
Okay, those are my questions, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Perks. Oh, he's just, are you okay? Yeah.
I guess to Mr. Farag. So to be clear, commercial office towers, we do not collect development charges.
We have not collected development charges on office gross floor area since the first bylaw, which was implemented in 1999.
Okay. We have a report coming later on the IMIT program, where we also give tax breaks to them in many instances.
Yes, the IMIT program does provide for tax-back grant program.
And further, when we implement new taxes or increase the mill rate, we only increase the mill rate at the rate of 1/3 as fast for commercial properties as we do for residential properties.
With the exception of the last 2 years where we've increased that by a half rather than a third.
That's right. So what other tax breaks and incentives do we give to commercial properties in the City of Toronto? That's a fairly good list.
To my knowledge, I believe that covers it.
Those are the three big ones. You don't have to send them flowers and chocolates to get, or anything like that to get them to build. That's in advance. That's Councillor Thompson's job, I guess. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that we give multiple different tax breaks to new office construction.
There are public policy reasons behind that.
I understand there are public policy reasons. I just wanted to make sure that that I understood that this development charge bylaw is in the context of a number of other breaks that we give.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Thank you.
Which, as you pointed out, we're trying to reform later in the meeting. I'm sure you'll be here for that. Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, thank you. So I know that you weren't around when this motion was passed, but there was a member's motion, well, you're around but not in that position. A member's motion that I moved in March 2011, it was seconded by Councillor Thompson, on bringing back a report on the priority neighborhoods on development charges, and as well, Councillor Ainsley put forward another motion as well. So I'm just wondering why this motion was never reported back since 2011?
Yes, so Councillor, through the Mayor, we certainly, to my knowledge, that motion has not been addressed, and it's my understanding that there is going to be a motion that will be advanced today to have us review that.
Yes.
And happy to do that and report back before the bylaw is adopted.
So would you, okay, no, actually I want to ask Greg Lintern this question. Greg, as far as development, the City of Toronto, as it was mentioned by Councillor DiCiano, is growing, but would you not agree that where it's growing is downtown and in the suburbs and areas like Weston and Mount Dennis, where we have priority neighborhoods and we have vacant storefronts and that hasn't been developed in 20, 30 years, that those areas would not grow with increase in development charges unless there's an incentive?
Well, through the chair,
and just, Greg, if you can comment, we took a walkabout, you and I and Mike Williams last week, and maybe you can describe what you saw and how disgusted you were.
Well, it's a multi-part question through the chair. The general comment on the city's growth is generally patterned on the transportation network and the official plan. The growth areas in the official plan are centers, avenues, the downtown. Over 80% of the city's growth is happening in those targeted areas: Scarborough Centre, North York Centre, Yonge and Eglinton. Etobicoke Centre, the downtown, the avenues. So clearly there are areas in between, what I would call the areas in between, Mount Dennis being among them, that is not attracting the level of interest and growth and investment. And certainly bringing transit fundamentally to these areas is going to be an important ingredient in bringing renewal and revitalization to these areas. My experience in walking the street with economic development and yourself and the community last week was certainly observe the lack of interest in renewal in the area. We do have a motion that I'm mindful of the time, but it was a long question. We do have a motion that we will be acting on to initiate a planning review of the area.
So you would support then if I move
Last question.
ask to put forward a motion today that Mount Dennis be part of a pilot where we can look at how we can encourage and incentives to bring development in a depressed area as it is?
I think from a planning point of view, Mr. Farag can comment on the financial matters, but from a planning point of view, certainly we can look at the planning policy, and we will be, to encourage and stimulate renewal and interest in the area.
Thanks, Councillor Nunziata. I have Councillor Davis next, actually, and then Councillor DeChannel. Councillor Davis? Councillor Davis?
Yes, thank you.
You're on. Thank you.
I know. I just had another conversation happening there. I, too, just want to follow up on Councillor Perk's questions. So, first of all, this study was done by Hempson, correct? And Hempson did the IMIT study, too, which is coming.
Yes, that's correct.
And they concluded that we don't need to provide any more incentives for office development in the downtown core. So how could we come to a conclusion here that is so different that we should exempt commercial buildings above the ground floor of DC charges?
So we have to look at the cumulative impact of all of the policies with respect to employment uses. And in assessing whether or not it would be advisable to take away the DC exemption as well as the IMET relief, we felt that that would have been too much of a burden, if you will, to absorb. And we signaled in the report, in the DC bylaw report, that we will be reviewing the exemption once we've had a chance to recognize the impacts of the contraction of the IMET program.
I mean, it's just very hard to see that, to understand why we would completely exempt the commercial properties that clearly, and office uses that are growing and that are identified so clearly in the IMIT report as not needing incentives anymore. So you're saying that we could potentially come back with something different than what's here, because what I don't understand in graph number, on page 18 on the graph, why we would recommend something so out of whack with all of the other municipalities.
This is the main street.
Well, the reason is that right now, as things stand, the City of Toronto's commercial tax rates are much, much higher than the rest of the GTAs. And so we felt that from a fiscal perspective, we really want to attract office development, because the revenue that is yielded from that type of development vastly is in excess of the operating costs, the municipal operating costs to service the development. And so from a fiscal impact assessment perspective, that's a desirable type of land use, and we want to promote it.
Okay. Just Hempson has said exactly the opposite in the other report. That's before us today.
They said that it wasn't required in the downtown core.
Attract them.
In the downtown core, in one particular area of the city. However, they concluded that it was required elsewhere across the city.
Okay. However, we do know that that is the area where the office and commercial, that's where the interest is in the downtown core. I know we'd love to see commercial development elsewhere in the other nodes. Are you saying that this would somehow ensure that we get more commercial development elsewhere?
Final question.
I think that's the objective. And again, We are targeting to come back with a review of the DC exemptions for employment uses in the first quarter of 2019. Once we've had an opportunity to assess the implications of clawing back the grants that are provided under the impact.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Councillor DiCiano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I personally believe that area-specific development charges or deferrals in certain areas to stimulate growth would be a disaster. So I would ask our interim chief planner if we were to go down the road where we would try and incentivize developers to go into certain pockets of the city and build and not charge them development charges, who then is stuck with connecting these new neighborhoods to our transit corridors? Who would then be stuck paying for the increase in those areas of the community centers and the parks if we were to incentivize a developer to go into areas that they're not currently in?
Through the mayor, that's essentially the difficult balance that needs to be struck. And the growth plan that that guides the planning that we do in the city certainly calls for the intensification of the city. Less read sections of the growth plan, however, talk about infrastructure, and they are equally important. And we want to build complete communities in a livable city, so we have to be mindful of doing everything we can to bring on the housing supply, including affordable housing, but we also have to be mindful of bringing forward infrastructure, sometimes in not so timely a manner. And the DCs is one obvious tool that links the two and allows us to address both sides of that ledger. And I'm not going to say that it doesn't have its complexities or difficulties.
Yeah. So, and we tried that in Etobicoke, in my ward, Etobicoke on Dundas Street, about 20 years ago. We brought in a study and we basically upzoned the area, did we not? And said that because we're close to the Kipling subway station, that we would just allow basically an upzoning of the area to incentivize developers to come in?
Zoning is certainly an official plan policy, and zoning are certainly tools in the toolkit. They're not always a panacea. Right. You need the market as well. You need transportation and other things. Zoning's part of the puzzle. Yeah. Certainly putting in place, as of right, more permissive zoning that still gets you a good outcome is part of it.
Yeah. So, and the development didn't come till 20 years later, really. We upzoned it, but like you said, the market wasn't ready for that area until the market was ready. So now we're seeing a major uptick in applications for the area. Is that correct?
I would agree with that.
So we essentially lost millions of dollars in Section 37 for the community because we thought by incentivizing 20 years ago they would come, and the reality is they're coming today and they got the discount from 20 years ago.
I don't know that we necessarily lost anything if they're still asking for more than what the permitted density is, and by and large they are.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor DiCiano. Do I have any other members of council visiting us today who want to ask questions? All right. Then I would move to members of the committee, and the Deputy Mayor was first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had some questions about the issuance of above-grade permits, but I'm going to talk to, this is coming back in March, yes?
April now. I think it's actually going to be, we're going to propose it be April because everybody wanted an extra month. But yes, it'll be back here.
I'll try and work it out, and if it doesn't work out, I'll come back in April.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Yes, right. Any other questions from members of the committee? Councillor Deputy Mayor Bylaw.
Thank you. So one of your proposals is to eliminate the exemption for nonprofit because we now have the Open Door program. But the Open Door program is a program that ends by 2021. So I'm hopeful that it get renewed, but there's no guarantees. It would have to be approved by the council of the day. This bylaw goes until 2023. So this could be an issue. Would you agree?
Yes, unless the Open Door program is extended for an equal duration.
Okay, so there could be an issue. Also, on page 31, on the commercial calculated DCs, I'm curious to understand why you don't allocate any money for housing. I would think that all the businesses that come to Toronto needs their employees to live someplace. So I don't understand why we don't allocate a percentage to housing.
I'm going to ask the consultant, who's much more technically familiar with the calculation of the charge, to respond to that.
Yes, through the chair, the typical approach for funding of social housing components and some of the others is to look at what is driving the need. And for that component, it's generally considered that it's increases in population and the development process that's driving directly and indirectly the need for subsidized housing. So the costs have been fully allocated to residential growth.
I didn't get that answer. So if we get more, yeah.
My apologies. I'm pleased to repeat my answer if that's helpful. The approach that's used in development charge studies under the legislative framework is to examine what are the key drivers for each particular service in terms of the increased need. Through the discussions, we determined that it's largely residential development that is driving the increased need for the provision of social housing, and so all of those incremental costs associated with development were attributed to the residential development and funded through that portion of the rate.
So you're telling me that the need for affordable housing is the creation of more housing, and that having more people coming to live in the city and work in the city doesn't create the need for more affordable housing?
Yes, through the chair, it's the increase in the population that is driving the need for the housing. That's the approach that we have taken.
But if you bring more jobs into the city, you need to have more people living into the city. Isn't that, I mean, don't we attract jobs to the city if we have the human capital in the city?
It's a reasonable question, and we're pleased to reevaluate it, but that is the approach that's been used in jurisdictions elsewhere, and I think there's a reasonable we'd be pleased to make that part of the reporting back in March or April.
That'd be great. The percentage that we have now for affordable housing is 7.8%. Is that correct from what I wrote in the report? So 7.8% of the development charges are going to go to affordable housing?
Yes, I believe that is the appropriate allocation.
Is that consistent or an increase from what we have currently?
It is definitely an increase in terms of dollar amount.
In terms of percentage?
In terms of percentage, I could get back to you, Councillor.
Great. Secondary suites, you are doing a review that is going to come back on the development charges on how the secondary auxiliary suites development charges is going to be allocated. Is that what I read from the report?
Yes, we really would like to consult further on the tax treatment of second suites and the DC treatment of second suites. Under the proposed draft bylaw, there would be a charge that would be exigable on second suites, but we've heard from the stakeholders that we need to consult further on that.
On this one, okay. And one question, why was there a discrepancy so big between the one-bedroom increase and the two-bedroom? Because we just went through planning on a whole, growing up vertical, incentivizing 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, incentivizing bigger units, we're all, any of us, when we get a townhouse development, we get all excited. So why the discrepancy? What's the rationale?
Go ahead, Rob.
The Chair, Councillor, the increase, there was a discrepancy in the increase for multiples, not for apartments, but for multiples. It's related to an improvement in the persons per unit assumption based on more recent StatsCan figures. So it's essentially an improvement on what was done in the previous bylaw 5 years ago based on more current numbers. Okay. Councillor Deputy Mayor Barlow, thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Do I get 4.5 minutes as well?
I might consider that.
No worries. I don't need that.
If you continue this questioning of me any longer, the answer will be no. But
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. Section 37, you've got the graphs here that shows DC charges in other areas in the GTA. Do those other areas also charge Section 37?
To my knowledge, they have the ability to do that. I'm not sure the extent to which they actually implement Section 37.
So you don't know then when we look at these numbers here and you're saying that
our numbers are much lower than theirs. You don't know whether or not there's a component part in there that's actually 37, section 37?
That's fair to say, yes.
Would it be helpful to be able to examine that to determine whether or not we're comparing apples to apples or it's apples to oranges?
Certainly, we could look at that when we report back.
And I ask this question because I've been told by a number of developers that when they develop in those areas where we're using our comparators and so on, the section 37 is not a component part because they're usually not charged that.
So I'm fairly certain that other municipalities have the ability to impose it. I'm not sure if they practically do so. I should mention that Section 37 is really an exchange of, height and density to secure benefits, and so the developer does realize a gain.
So when you, I looked at, I just get the page here. You've got a number of, just find the page here, excuse me. What page was that, David? Is that 10? On page 10, I'm just looking at page 10, where you have the rates, the current versus calculated rates and so on. So in the, I guess the third column where you have the DC 2018 DC study calculated maximum rates, and you show the movement from the current, which is let's say looking at a 2-bedroom, and you have 25,366, and moving to 2018 you'd have $51,740. How realistic is that given the current condition in the city with respect to affordability, and there's a huge demand in terms of housing? How is it possible that we could look at establishing rates like that? Because at the end of the day, these payments would actually not be coming from the developer. It's actually being charged to the purchaser. Is that not correct? How is it possible that they'd be able to afford that?
So I think it's really important to understand that this development charge is a cost recovery tool. And, there's no windfall to be made by the city. It's simply recovering costs from new development and to finance infrastructure. Having said that, I think, the economic impact analysis that we've conducted suggests that the developer may absorb a portion of those costs. Some of those costs may be passed on to the purchaser of these new units. And as Councillor DiCiano, I think, correctly pointed out, in the medium to longer term, these additional charges will be capitalized in the value of the raw land. So it's really debatable as to who, at the end of the day, which economic actors are going to be having to absorb these additional charges.
But it's a very important question, because there is a core policy choice here. And if you look on page 12,
yes,
what these development charges are is actually the allocation appropriately in accordance with provincial statute, those proposal to allocate as much of those costs as feasible to the development industry. There will obviously be follow-on costs depending on the state of the market. The alternative to that is to either not implement these or to put them solely on other sources of own source revenue, to either implement a higher property tax or to create another source of tax revenue. But that is the alternative. Not doing these things, DCs, or raising the revenue through other own source revenues.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to have your concurrence to extend for just a few minutes, because we have, I think, only one more person to ask questions of staff. That's Councillor Ainsley. Oh, do you want to ask? You want to ask as well? Well, then, if it's 2, then is that 3? Okay. Well, then we'll just adjourn for lunch, and we'll finish this item after lunch. Thank you very much. No, I
relatively zero-sum.
Very important. Very important.